Chapter 605. Do you know what you're doing? The voice seeped out from the Pope's lips. It was no longer like the sound of water from before, so cold and bone-chilling. Chen Chongqing looked into his eyes and solemnly said, I know very well what I'm doing. He appeared very calm, but he was actually very nervous. The hand gripping the armrest of the wheelchair was faintly trembling, and even the blood on his face seemed to have faded from his emotions. He had not used the blazing sword. He had controlled his true essence to a certain extent so that the true blood would not seep out of his body too quickly. But the Pope was one of the world's supreme experts. At such a close distance, he could naturally smell the scent of his blood. The sea of stars in the Pope's eyes had already become a raging river of stars. Chen Chongqing was taking a risk to his life, a risk that even exceeded this level of danger. He was doing it on purpose. It was impossible to know his master's intentions. His martial uncle the Pope was his most important elder in the world, but also the person he could least trust. The Pope had said earlier that Archbishop Melicia had no ill will towards him, but what about him? He had to clearly know what the Pope's attitude towards him was, whether he had good or bad will towards him. If the Pope harbored evil intentions towards him, then the greatest benefit he could obtain from him was to eat him. This sort of temptation and desire was far more important than the imperial throne, far more important than power. Just what would the Pope do? He calmly gazed at the raging river of stars in the Pope's eyes. His nervousness gradually dissipated, leaving behind only calm, true calm. The Pope gazed at him, the raging river of stars in his eyes growing more and more terrifying, like it could swallow up the entire world at any moment. Su Yorong stood in the light, calmly gazing at the mural on the wall. She raised her head but not looked up. This mural depicted the 12 sages. These 12 sages were not all saints, but they had played extremely important roles in the history of the orthodoxy, their statuses even higher than the saint. It was said that this stone wall, several dozen zhang high, and the materials used to paint it, had been mixed with fragments of heavenstone. As long as there was a single source of light from the outside world, it could produce an infinite radiance. So whether it was day or night, this place would always be so bright and solemn. Suddenly, the light in the hall grew even brighter, even somewhat dazzling. Su Yorong slightly narrowed her eyes, her beautiful eyes like willow leaves, but also like the edge of a sword. She felt the violent energy in the light and opened her arms. With 2 light claps, the tong bao was gripped in her left hand and the temple sword in her right. Whoosh! A pair of pure white wings unfurled behind her, slowly fluttering. Other than the 12 sages, there were also many saints and oracles. The divine emissary at the highest point had an indifferent expression, but his eyes were extremely tyrannical, as if he couldn't wait to devour all life in front of him. The messenger of God was destroyed. Looking at the oracle in the mural, Su Yorong's expression was calm. After standing in the light palace for a period of time, she had not completely recovered from the injuries in her body, nor had she recovered her true yuan and holy light. But she was already prepared for battle. She had already forcefully raised her cultivation to its peak. The tong bao was on her left, the temple sword on her right, and her wings were flying. If the battle truly began, she would burn her heavenly phoenix true blood at all costs. Although she still had not reached star condensation, in her current state, even if Guanbai used his strongest heavenly Dao sword, he would still not necessarily be a match for her. But in this battle, her opponent was not Guanbai, nor was it the divine emissary in charge of destruction in the murals, but the old man behind the murals. That old man was the supreme expert of this world. Separated from the great hall of light by a single wall, the Pope stood in front of his wheelchair, gazing at Chen Chongqing, the rivers of stars violently surging in his eyes. The expression on his face was abnormally indifferent, like that of a heartless and ignorant god. Chen Chongqing knew that this was the most crucial moment, so his mind actually relaxed. The truth was hidden behind the darkness. With his intelligence, he could not clearly see it, so he chose to use the crudest method to tear apart the curtain of night, even if it was only a corner. Suddenly, the sound of water stopped. Previously, clear water had been incessantly falling from the wooden ladle suspended in the air into the green leaf in the basin. Chen Chongqing had seen the Pope water the green leaf several times before, so he knew that the water in that wooden ladle was seemingly endless. But today, the water in that wooden ladle seemed to be empty. The moment the sound of water stopped, the Pope's body slightly trembled. Those marks of starlight that had fallen on his hemp clothes, like incomprehensible runes, had also become deformed and somewhat indistinct. In that instant, the raging rivers of stars in the depths of the Pope's eyes also froze for a moment. The wind lightly ruffled the green leaf, and the starlight illuminated the night sky. How many truths of history were hidden in his aged wrinkles! Gradually deepening, the Pope closed his eyes. Taoist Siyuan, several cardinals, and even more priests of the Li Palace were currently outside the Great Hall of Light. They had already sensed the abnormality within the hall, especially the violent energy seeping out of the rays of light, which made their hearts tremble in fear. In this sacred radiance, they could faintly make out a pair of pure white wings unfurling from Su Yorong's back. To be able to personally witness the advancement and awakening of the legendary Heavenly Phoenix bloodline should have been an extremely shocking matter, but at this moment they found it impossible to experience this sort of feeling, because they knew that something major was about to happen. Taoist Siyuan could no longer remain where he was. His face cold, he charged into the myriad rays of light in the hall. As a prefect of the orthodoxy, he possessed the supreme strength of a peak star condensation cultivator, only half a step from the divine domain. Those rays of light suffused with violent energy could not stop his steps. But when he reached the depths of the hall, he did not know what he should do. He vaguely knew that something major was about to happen, but he did not know what it was. Her pure white wings slowly flapped. Su Yorong's left hand gripped her bow and her right hand gripped her sword. Her calm expression concealed the solemnity of facing a great foe, but in the end she did nothing. Taoist Siyuan could not possibly strike first in this sort of situation. It must be known that Su Yorong was the Holy Maiden of the South, possessing the same status in the orthodoxy as the Pope. If he struck first without asking the reason, it would be the greatest disrespect, even the most heinous of crimes. Su Yorong truly did nothing. She only quietly gazed at the mural on the stone wall. She could clearly sense that although the light seeping out of the mural was still blazing, that violent feeling was gradually returning to silence. She quietly gazed at the mural, and the people in the mural also quietly gazed back at her. Besides the god of destruction's emissary and the saints in the clouds, there were also the 12 sages standing on the ground, pitying the suffering of the common people. The eyes of those sages were clear and bright, their expressions gentle and benevolent. The Pope opened his eyes. The violent river of stars in the depths of his eyes had already vanished, and the vast sea of stars could no longer be seen. His eyes were clear and bright. His eyes were so clear and bright, his expression so gentle and compassionate. He turned and walked to the green leaf in the basin. He took the wooden ladle from the air, scooped some water from the pool, and poured it into the basin. The green leaf, which had turned somewhat yellow from the violent qi, instantly regained a threatening green. The Pope scooped another ladle of water from the pool and poured it over his body, drenching him from head to toe. He scooped another ladle of water and walked to the wheelchair. Beads of water dripped down from his white hair. His soaked hemp clothes stuck to his body, revealing his old and withered body. With a splash, the Pope poured all the water in the wooden ladle over Chen Chongqing's head. The night hall was gloomy and rarely saw sunlight, so the chill of the water in the pool was difficult to dispel. Chen Chongqing shuddered and his entire body was drenched. A faint steam rose from his body, but before it could get far, the Pope lightly waved his sleeve and scattered it into nothingness. His scalding body instantly returned to its normal temperature, and the blood that had been seeping out of his body was also suppressed. The Pope returned the wooden ladle to its original place, took out 2 dry towels, and gave one to Chen Chongsheng. "I now know why your master gave you the name Chongsheng," the Pope said to Chen Chongsheng as he wiped away the water on his face. Chen Chongsheng wiped his face, saying nothing. As expected, eating you might allow one to obtain Chongsheng. The Pope's voice was very indifferent. Chen Chongsheng looked at the slightly wet towel in his hand and said, "Master said that it was because of the divine soul entering the essence blood, but in truth, I don't really believe it. Everyone has a divine soul, so who can be so moving? What makes you different is that your body possesses countless strands of sacred light." The Pope looked at him, his gaze extremely distant, like he was looking at another world. Chapter 606. Sacred Light. Chen Chongsheng appeared perplexed. He naturally knew what sacred light was, but although he was well versed in the Taoist canon, he had never entered the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, nor had he gone to Holy Maiden Peak, so why was his body brimming with sacred light? Suddenly, he recalled a name. It was a place rarely mentioned, not even clearly recorded in the Taoist canon. The first time he had truly heard the name of this place was on that snowy day at the beginning of the year, when he and Su Yorong were discussing where Senior Su Li would go. As expected, in the next moment, he once more heard this name from the Pope's words. Could it be that your master really went to the sacred light continent? The Pope slightly creased his brow as if he had encountered a problem that was very difficult to understand. But this is also not completely certain. There's always been a rumor that a portion of the descendants of the Cloud Grave passed through the barrier of space and went to the sacred light continent. Emperor Taizong had no way of exterminating them, so he stopped his search. If that branch of the Chen imperial clan really is living on that side, then your situation can be explained. Chen Chongsheng finally understood that the sacred light continent was not an illusory existence. There might even be people who had gone there, and those people were highly likely to be his clansmen, but there were still some questions that he could not understand. Could it be that the people living on the sacred light continent all have so much sacred light in their bodies? It's rumored that the world of the sacred light continent is brimming with limitless sacred light, but the situation you speak of is still impossible. Your situation is still special. The Pope looked at him with pity. When you were still in your mother's womb, your sun wheel was already destroyed. Logically speaking, it should have been impossible for you to survive. According to my conjecture, it was probably some eccentric person on the sacred light continent who gathered an unimaginable amount of sacred light and forcefully poured it into your body, helping you survive. After a moment of silence, Chen Chongsheng said, "Living is rather arduous. But living is still a good thing." The Pope extended a hand and caressed his head. "Go. If you still don't leave, I'm truly worried that the Holy Maiden will burn down the Great Hall of Light." Chen Chongsheng lowered his head, accepting the old man's loving blessing. The hard stone floor resounded with the grinding of wheels as he pushed his wheelchair out of the hall. The Pope gazed at his back and said, "In the future, do not use this method to probe. It's very dangerous." Chen Chongsheng stopped the wheelchair and nodded after a moment of silence. Neither human nature nor the human heart can be tested, because when you start thinking of ways to test it, it means that you have already begun to doubt it. The Pope concluded, "And doubt is the root of all misfortune." It was early autumn and not yet bleak. The big banyan tree by the lake was still swaying its green leaf. Only some yellowish leaves could be seen occasionally on the lawn. The Orthodox Academy was heavily guarded today, the Orthodoxy cavalry vigilantly patrolling outside the alley. Those restaurants outside the alley that were normally brightly lit had also received the news and closed their doors early, leaving the place deserted. The disciples of South Stream Temple did not remain in the Li Palace, nor did they go to the Imperial Palace. Instead, they went straight to the Orthodox Academy and began to pitch tents on the lawn. At the same time, they impolitely took over the library. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were blocked outside by a curtain of cloth. As they watched those beautiful disciples of South Stream Temple enter and leave, they actually did not feel too conflicted. They were even secretly happy, but they did not show it on their faces. They indignantly grumbled, "When did the Orthodox Academy come under the control of Holy Maiden Peak?" At this time, Su Mo Yu and Xianyuan Po were in the kitchen on the other side of the lake that had just been repaired for less than half a year. According to the disciples of South Stream Temple, they could not return to the small building for the time being. Only when they were allowed could they return and take their clothes and daily necessities. This naturally made them very angry. Just what happened? Why do the people of Holy Maiden Peak have to live in the academy? And they even want to steal our place, so where are we going to live? Zheshio sat on the doorsill of the kitchen, looking at the newly planted locust trees by the wall. As usual, he feigned loneliness and despair. The person who answered this question could only be Tang 36. There is one thing that you might not know, but I believe that you will know very soon, just like everyone else in this world. He looked at Suemo Yu and Xianyuan Po and said very seriously, "Chen Chongxing has had an affair with Su Yurong for a long time." These words were very vulgar, but it was the clearest way to explain the current situation. Silence. Suemo Yu and Xianyuan Po needed a lot of time to digest the shock in their hearts. Suemo Yu's first reaction was to frown at Tang 36. "How can you use such vulgar words on the Holy Maiden?" Xianyuan Po's reaction was also very direct, his face full of praise. "The principal is truly amazing, but what about Her Highness?" This time it was Tang 36's turn to be shocked. He looked at the two and said, "Are you not disappointed, not angry? Why should we be disappointed? That adulterous couple kept us in the dark for so long. Tang, I'm warning you, this matter involves the Holy Maiden, don't use such vulgar words," Suemo Yu said seriously. Tang 36 said angrily, "You were already kicked out of the door and you still want to speak up for them?" Xianyuan Po said with a simple and honest face, "This is equivalent to a new wife bringing her family to visit for the first time, of course we have to treat them well." Chen Chongxing and Su Yurong didn't know that they had once again become a pair of adulterous couple in Tang 36's mouth. They were currently discussing their previous trip to Li Palace. "Suspicion is the source of all misfortune," these were the last words Martial Uncle said to me. I know that this was a teaching for me, but I think that when he said these words, he might have remembered that when teacher sent me to the capital, it was also a thorn inserted between him and the Divine Empress. Then, to him, this was also a sort of misfortune. His Holiness the Pope's heart is for the world. The misfortune he feels should be more of the misfortune of the world, the misfortune of the millions upon millions of people. But to be used by teacher like this, even if Martial Uncle truly believed that the Divine Empress should abdicate, he would still feel somewhat uncomfortable. That's why I say your teacher truly is a schemer. Right now I really want to know just what sort of person he really is. Su Yurong withdrew her gaze from the distance and looked at Chen Chongxing. The starlight and the early autumn wind came in through the window and fell on his face. It was very comfortable, just like the feeling he gave others. She didn't know what sort of person Daoist Ji, or perhaps Principal Shang, was. She only knew that she had never loathed a person so much. Even though that person was Chen Chongxing's teacher. It was precisely because that person was Chen Chongxing's teacher. Who in the world would be so cold and heartless as to use the student he had brought up as a chess piece, and was even unwilling to let his senior brother, who had once spared his life, go? Chen Chongxing thought of the words recorded in Wang Jisu's notebook in the Pavilion of Ascending Mist. Wang Jisu's notebook did not specifically mention Daoist Ji. He only described how he had gone to visit a few ministers and famous generals of the Pavilion of Ascending Mist before they died of illness. He had either encountered or heard of Daoist Ji's visit. As the divine doctor with the best medical skills in the great Zhou dynasty, when those ministers and famous generals were gravely ill, he would receive orders to visit them. This seemed to be a very normal matter. But thinking about it from another perspective, it could also be said that not long after Daoist Ji had gone to visit those ministers and famous generals on Emperor Taizong's orders, those important figures whose names would go down in history returned to the Sea of Stars. And if one thought about it, Daoist Ji was a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy. Many years later, he would restore Shang Xingzhou's real name and take charge of the Orthodox Academy, secretly plotting to overthrow the Divine Empress's rule. I think teacher should have been the person Emperor Taizong trusted the most. After Chen Chongqing said this, he suddenly felt that the autumn wind blowing in through the window was rather cold. The room was quiet for a very long time. If this matter really was traced back to Taizong's era, if it really was extended to that distant, unknown continent, then it was far too complicated. Although he and she were not ordinary youths, they would still only be 17 in 2 months. They did not know what had happened back then, so how could they see through these layers of fog? Right now we can only be sure that His Holiness the Pope has no ill intentions towards you, Su Yurong said. Chen Chongqing nodded his head. This was a fact that he had taken an enormous risk to confirm, but in truth, he still could not completely understand why the Pope had stopped at that moment. If it really was as the Pope said, that his body contained countless strands of sacred light, then eating him would allow him to enter an unimaginable realm and obtain true freedom, transcending the suffering of life and death. Even the demon lord was willing to risk entering Mount Han to eat him, so how could the Pope control him? Senior Yuren had said that only saints could resist the temptation of his blood. What he said here was ability, not will. If it were Chen Chongqing in this situation, he did not know what choice he would make. In the Pope's heart, what was more important than this? Of course, it was not power. He silently thought that it could only be the future of the human race. Su Yurong knew what he was thinking and said, "It's also because of reverence." For an important figure like the Pope, whether it was in terms of cultivation, strength, or status, what else could there be reverence? The starry sky that the people of the world could see when they raised their heads, as well as that light in the depths of their hearts. That light might be morality, or principles, or love, or familial love, or a bowl of noodles with fried eggs, or the blood in one's body. It was thick for you and thick for me. Not everyone could maintain this kind of reverence. Su Yurong believed that Chen Chongqing's teacher did not. Even at the highest heights, he still maintained reverence in his heart. This sort of person was truly extraordinary. From start to finish, from the heavens to the earth, from light to darkness, without reverence, this sort of person was truly terrifying. Up until now, that person had always been hiding in the shadows. They only knew that he would assuredly use Chen Chongqing, but they did not know how he would use Chen Chongqing. I still adhere to the view I had in Mount Han. Su Yurong said, "We should tell everything to the Empress." Chen Chongqing quietly gazed out the window, saying nothing for a very long time. Chapter 607. Putting aside the Pope for the moment and putting aside his senior brother, between his teacher and the Divine Empress, who did Chen Chongqing trust more? Not too long ago, he would not even need to think to give an answer, but now, after a very long period of reflection, he could only dejectedly realize that he trusted no one. He had never met the Divine Empress, but he had a little understanding of her through Mou, Su Yorong and Prince Chen Lu. Of course, he had read far too many records concerning the Divine Empress in book. He knew just how powerful and callous that woman who possessed the highest authority in the world was. Now that he thought about it, his teacher might also have been this sort of person. Or perhaps the higher one's cultivation, the fewer things one cared about and the more indifferent one would become to the world? After stepping into the divine domain, one could no longer be considered a mortal, so one naturally would not possess too many of the emotions of mortals. If we really do as you say, the Divine Empress and the Pope will no longer have any leeway for a buffer. Even if everyone has been deceiving themselves in these last 2 years, there will always be some reason for deceiving themselves. The conflict between the imperial court and the orthodoxy will rapidly intensify, and perhaps the capital will fall into chaos tomorrow. Chen Chongqing looked at her and said, I am not Wang Po, able to continue to treat the world as my responsibility even after my family is destroyed, but if the world falls into chaos because of me, I will still feel a great deal of psychological pressure. Moreover, if I really am Crown Prince Xiaoming, I cannot imagine any reason for the Empress to let me go. If you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming, then the Empress is your birth mother. Su Yorong looked at his calm expression and knew that these words were not enough to convince him. Not even these words were enough to convince herself. A person like the Divine Empress would probably find it very difficult to be bound by these so-called family ties. She gazed at the autumn trees outside the window and said, I will plead on your behalf. If the Empress really does want to kill me, whose pleading will be of any use? And I think that she knows everything now. Chen Chongqing stood up and walked to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. On the 10,000-li journey back from Mount Han, under Su Yorong's meticulous care, his injuries had not improved, but they had not temporarily worsened either. Under the effect of the heavenly phoenix's true blood, he had even recovered some strength. The starlight shone on Su Yorong's beautiful face, making it seem even paler. I have to find a way to resolve this. In truth, there is a very simple method. What method? Regardless of what kind of conspiracy master is plotting, it must have something to do with me. Since that's the case, if I disappear, these things will naturally disappear as well. The bubbles on the surface of the lake reflected the starlight, beautiful and illusory, but in fact, the extremely thin walls of those bubbles were all water. If there was no water, the bubbles would naturally not exist. Su Yorong vaguely guessed what he wanted to say. To people like the Divine Empress and Taoist Ji, wanting to disappear before their eyes was an extremely difficult task. There was only one situation, and that was one that neither the Divine Empress nor Taoist Ji could resolve. That was to truly leave this world. His soul returned to the sea of stars, and his body turned into dust. Death. In the days since I left Mount Han, I've actually been thinking, perhaps I was originally a person that should not have survived. If I were Crown Prince Xiaoming, then according to the Empress's theory of defying the heavens and changing fate as a sacrifice to the starry sky, I simply should not have been born. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that when I was still in my mother's womb, before I could even open my eyes, the sun wheel in my body collapsed, but for some reason, I did not die. A person that should have died long ago lived for 10-some years. This in itself defied the heavenly Tao, so it would naturally throw the human world into chaos. Although I'm late by 10-some years, if I die now, perhaps it can be considered a sort of remedy, just like building a new wall for the sheep pen. If I die, these schemes will all be useless. These conflicts also seem to have no meaning. All that remains is peace, and that's pretty good. Chen Chongqing stared into Su Yorong's eyes and spoke with extreme seriousness. He did not speak quickly, doing his utmost to enunciate each word as clearly as possible, ensuring that his thoughts could be heard. Su Yorong heard and confirmed his meaning. Her expression remained calm, but her voice sank, tinged with anger. I won't let you die. You understand. Even if I don't want to die, I will still die in the end. It's just a matter of a few dozen days sooner or a few dozen days later. Chen Chongqing looked at her and earnestly explained. In his long conversation with the Pope in the Li Palace, he spoke of the story from 1,000 years ago, spoke of the other continent countless li away, spoke of his illness, but did not speak in detail, much less discuss how to cure it. It was already very clear that not even the Pope could cure his illness. Perhaps it was because he had been pondering this matter ever since he was 10 years old, but when this matter truly appeared before his eyes, Chen Chongqing did not feel any fear. Perhaps he had become numb? He thought in his heart. At this moment, he was very seriously pondering. Since he was going to die, then what he should do before he died, how he should die. At most, it would be a difference of a few dozen days. Dying early or late was not important. What was important was when he would die. His meridians would wither, his blood would run dry, or would he be eaten by those supreme experts of the world? How he died was not important. What was important was that he himself decided. He cultivated the Tao of following his heart. If life could not go as he wished, then he naturally had to care about the end. As he thought of these questions, his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Looking into his eyes, Su Yorong confirmed his intentions, and her heart was slightly grieved. "I won't let you die," she said. In Mount Han, on the journey, and just now, she would often say to Chen Chongqing, "I won't let you die." At this time, she would say, "I won't let you die." These two sentences were only separated by a single word, but they had completely different meanings, representing completely different moods. Normally, when a girl said these words, the rims of their eyes would often turn red, and they would even be choking with sobs. But Su Yorong remained very calm, even deliberately indifferent. But not even she noticed that when she said these words, her voice was slightly trembling. This was the deepest despair. In the entire continent, only 5 people knew that Chen Chongqing was about to die. To the ordinary people of the capital, this was just a very ordinary day in early autumn. They lived their lives as usual, working and eating, walking and looking, drinking and chatting. When they saw the carriage of a noble family crash into a stone lion, they would go and watch the spectacle. When they heard some gossip, they would begin to enthusiastically express their opinions. On this ordinary autumn day, a shocking piece of news spread through the entire capital, attracting the attention of all the people. Many people had already known yesterday that the party from Holy Maiden Peak and the Orthodoxy's party had come to the capital together, but only this morning did they know that the Holy Maiden had not lived in the Li Palace, nor had she lived in the Imperial Palace, nor had she returned to the Divine General of the East's estate. Instead, she had gone directly to the Orthodox Academy. Moreover, it was said that she had stayed in the Orthodox Academy for an entire night. The Holy Maiden definitely stayed in the Orthodox Academy for an entire night. A pawnbroker stood in front of his shop, waving his arms as he loudly declared. His expression was extremely solemn, as if he was narrating a scripture of the orthodoxy. No one could quickly accept this sort of matter, especially those young men. Whether they were scholars or laborers, the people surrounding the shop all had very unsightly expressions. Chapter 608. Someone looked at the pawnbroker, who was spitting saliva, and angrily yelled, "Which eye of yours saw that?" The pawnbroker looked at him with disdain and said, "My brother-in-law's nephew is studying in the Orthodox Academy. South Stream Temple has so many disciples living there, how could they not see it?" Not only him, many people clearly saw that the Holy Maiden and Chen Chongqing were standing by the window upstairs and chatting. The street became quiet. On a starry night, a young man and woman standing by the window, leaving behind their silhouettes, was a very beautiful scene. Yet, no one was willing to cheer for this scene. After an unknown period of time, the crowd finally came back to their senses. They were shocked and confused. Since last year, it had been rumored that Chen Chongqing had forcefully annulled the engagement with the Su family. Although after the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, Chen Chongqing seemed to have changed his mind, but did the Holy Maiden really forgive him so easily? She was just going to live in the Orthodox Academy. Was she really going to marry him? What face would the Su estate have? Wouldn't the Divine General of the East Su Shiji, famed for his cold and stern eyes, become a joke? In the early morning, Tang 36, Xianyuan Puro and Su Mou, accompanied by the disciples of South Stream Temple, entered the small building to retrieve their luggage, preparing to move to the east side of the Orthodox Academy. Zheshio would not do such a thing. His rather shabby luggage was carried by Xian Yuanpo. They stood in front of the closed door, carrying their luggage, looking rather pitiful. You have to leave him some face, after all. This is the Orthodox Academy and he is the principal. Tang 36 shouted at the closed door. Even if you are doing this for his safety, this is still too much. Is there a need to surround this place with the sword array of South Stream Temple, and even want to drive us away? This is the capital, not Mount Han. Even the demon lord would not dare to come here. This room was Chen Chongqing's residence, but he was talking to Su Yurong. After a night, the disciples of South Stream Temple and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy all knew that she had not left the room. The door was still closed, not pushed open, and no sound came out. Su Yurong sat at the desk by the window and looked at Chen Chongqing, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. From time to time, she would stretch out her fingertips and gently rub away his wrinkled eyebrows from pain. The tong bao was gripped in her left hand, emitting a faint qi that formed a barrier that ensured that the sounds of the outside world would not disturb Chen Chongqing's rest. But she could hear Tang 36's words. She knew that her sudden return to the capital with the disciples of South Stream Temple was certain to incite much discussion and shock, but she did not care. She had the disciples of South Stream Temple surround this small building, and even wanted to drive Tang 36 and the others away. This seemed rather unreasonable, but this was because in Chen Chongqing's current situation, if he wanted true safety, it was best if he did not see anyone. She had separated him from Tang 36 and the others, which was a good thing for both sides. Seeing that the door was still closed, Tang 36 was a little annoyed. He turned around and walked downstairs. Walking out of the small building and onto the lawn, they walked past the sword wills that had yet to be released. Suddenly, they saw a middle-aged man standing under a tree by the lake. This middle-aged man's eyebrows were as thick as ink, his expression indifferent, and he exuded a somber aura. As his clothes swayed in the morning breeze, he faintly smelled of blood. Yi Xiaoyan and the 10-some disciples of South Stream Temple stood in front of this middle-aged man, their expressions rather nervous, but they could not do anything to him. Because he was the temple master's father, the divine general of the East, Su Shiji. You've returned to the capital? Why didn't you return to the estate and instead live here? You've truly lost all face for my Su clan. Su Shiji saw the unconcealable haggardness on his daughter's elegant face, but he did not feel any pity for her. On the contrary, he felt rather uncomfortable. Before leaving the estate, he had originally planned to speak as gently as possible, but his voice could not help but become cold, brimming with chilliness, like he was reprimanding her. The lawn by the lake was very quiet, the curtains blocking out the distant gazes, but the disciples of South Stream Temple had all heard these words and were displeased. Even if you are the Holy Maiden's father, how can you use this tone to speak? A few young female disciples, like Yi Xiaoyan, regarded Su Yurong as holy and inviolable like a god. With their minds slightly agitated, their sword intense and hostility gradually grew. Su Shiji felt this hostility and sword intent, then looked at his daughter standing silently by the lake. He found it even harder to restrain his anger. He yelled, "Don't tell me you still dare to kill your own father." Su Yurong turned around, looked at her father, and said, "Father, what are you talking about?" Her voice was very calm, very light, and very indifferent, so this explanation did not sound like an explanation at all. Of course, it certainly did not sound like an apology. Su Shiji's complexion became even more unsightly as he recalled many things from the past. When she was very young, Su Yurong had always been personally raised by the Grand Minister. Neither he nor his wife could interfere. When she was 5, the blood of the true phoenix in Su Yurong's body awakened and she was taken into the palace by the Divine Empress. Coincidentally, she also met the Holy Maiden who had come to the capital to view the mausoleum. As a result, she became the student of the two saints, so it was even less of his turn to educate her. The common people did not have a high evaluation of Su Shiji, but that was mainly because of his personal morality, such as his attitude towards the Tianhai family and his attitude towards Chen Chongqing. No one could deny that his ability was absolutely worthy of being a divine general of the Great Zhou. In the snowy plains of the north, he had achieved no small amount of military service. He governed the army with extreme strictness, and he governed the estate like he governed the army. Whether it was the deputy generals with special backgrounds in Snow Pass or the elders in the estate, they all kept quiet in front of him, not daring to oppose him in the slightest. Yet, he could not control his own daughter, because he did not have the right. To any father, this fact would not bring any joy, but since the Su estate wanted to enjoy the glory and benefits brought by Su Yorong, it had to endure all this. But in the end, he was still her father and she was his daughter. He believed that she would at least give him some respect, just like she had for the past few years. But this morning, by the lake of the Orthodox Academy, he realized that his thoughts were just deceiving himself. What a good unfilial daughter! Su Shiji's voice was as cold as ice. His right hand trembled as if it would strike Su Yorong's face in the next moment. Su Yorong calmly looked at her father. She naturally would not strike back. The eyes of the South Stream Temple disciples turned sharp, especially Yi Xiaoyan and the other girls, who tightened their grips on their swords. At this moment, a skinny old man arrived at the scene. The sword array of South Stream Temple was of no use against this old man. It was not because this old man was very powerful, but because he was the chief eunuch of the great Zhou imperial palace, a close minister deeply trusted by the divine empress. Moreover, when he arrived, he held high an imperial decree. The empress says, "Do not let such a minor matter affect the relationship between you two, father and daughter." The chief eunuch expressionlessly said to Su Shiji. The divine empress's words were clearly meant for two people, but he only looked at Su Shiji. His meaning was naturally very clear. This was a warning. Su Shiji's complexion turned even more unsightly. He thought to himself, is this sort of rebellious action still a minor matter? Is she really my daughter, or is she the empress's daughter? He could only think these things in his heart. He could not reveal any of them on the surface, and even had to force his face to be somewhat calm. He glanced at Su Yorong and said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the Orthodox Academy. His back seemed rather dispirited, like an old lion that had been chased out of its pride. Su Yorong silently gazed at her father's back, her thoughts inscrutable. The chief eunuch turned to her, his expression instantly becoming somewhat more humble. He whispered, "The Empress invites my lady into the palace." Su Yorong took the imperial decree and said, "Wait a moment for me. I don't know how to face her, and between the orthodoxy and her, I can't stand on her side." Chen Chongqing rejected the idea of entering the palace with Su Yorong. The her in this sentence naturally referred to the divine empress. Su Yorong said nothing. In truth, she was also keenly aware that if she brought Chen Chongqing into the palace, it would be an extremely risky matter. She knew that this saint, who had the heart of the world and perhaps even more, had a condescending and indifferent attitude towards the emotions of the world. In these 2 years, the divine empress had not done anything to Chen Chongqing. Perhaps it was because she had to consider the Li Palace, or perhaps it was because she had never been able to confirm anything. Now, all sorts of clues were pointing to that unresolved case from 10 years ago. No one could guarantee what would happen if she met Chen Chongqing in the imperial palace. "You don't need to worry about me." Chen Chongqing saw her expression and knew what she was thinking. "Before entering the capital, you used the sacred light technique once. Last night, Martial Uncle used sacred water to bathe my body, adding another barrier. There shouldn't be any problems in the short term, and won't the sword array of South Stream Temple always be outside?" Su Yorong said nothing more and left. Standing by the window, Chen Chongqing watched her figure gradually fade into the distance. His expression turned somewhat heavy. He understood his current situation better than anyone else, better than her, better than the Pope. His meridians had all been burnt and severed by the star radiance, and could not be repaired. His soul had seeped into his flesh and bones with his blood, and could not be eliminated. His injuries seemed to have been suppressed, but his vitality was constantly flowing away. His body and fate had long ago been riddled with holes and in tatters. If it were anyone else, they would have long since lost their soul, but he still maintained his calm. He walked down the small building and headed for the Orthodox Academy on the other side of the cloth. Su Yorong was not present, so the disciples of South Stream Temple could not stop him from leaving. Although the sword array was terrifying, how could it fall on his body? There were many statues outside the main building of the Orthodox Academy, all of them still bearing the marks of that heaven-shaking catastrophe 10-some years ago. The fountain had already been repaired, but the stone beast statues were still somewhat broken. He looked at Su Mou and said, "In the future, I might have to leave this place to you." He turned to Tang 36 and said, "If possible, it would be best if we could delay our return to Wenshui for a year." He then turned to Xianyuan Po and said, "Don't always think that your injuries have healed. You still have to keep taking medicine." Finally, he turned to Zhishio and said, "I can't continue to treat you, but I will do my best to bring out the medical records as soon as possible. You absolutely cannot give up on your treatment. 3 days ago, I drove to Ichuan with a total of 4 friends. It truly was a long distance and very tiring, but I was very happy. I really recommend that everyone go out and have some fun. The beauty of rivers and mountains cannot be seen too vividly in book. Although work is busy and life is tiring, you absolutely cannot give up on enjoyment. The old saying is correct. Life should be wasted on beautiful things." Chapter 609. Su Mou and the others didn't know what to say. They looked into each other's eyes and realized that they still didn't know what to say. "Just what are you saying?" Tang 36 stared into Chen Chongqing's eyes. "I'm going to die, but I can probably live for another 20-some days." Chen Chongqing's voice was very calm, his expression very indifferent, as if he was describing an extremely ordinary matter. The sky wanted to rain, the mother wanted to marry, so who would collect the clothes on the roof? The fresh peppers soaked in the earthen jar were already pricked, so one shouldn't forget to add water to the sides of the jar. Otherwise, if the jar turned white, even the best pickles would have to be thrown away. He had heard from his elders that if the pickles turned white, they could be saved by putting in strong alcohol, but how could those pickles be called perfect? That pitch-black hole over there seemed like a thief's nest. It seemed like it really was going to rain. Silence, like a deathly stillness. All that could be heard was the sound of a fountain. After some time, Tang 36 finally spoke again. "What kind of joke are you playing?" They were all keenly aware that Chen Chongqing was the last person to joke, and he certainly wouldn't joke about this sort of matter, so their complexions were very unsightly. Seeing the expressions of the four, for some reason, Chen Chongqing felt rather apologetic. Xianyuan Po's voice was somewhat trembling. "What's wrong?" Tang 36 and Zhishio had gone with him to Mount Han and knew that he had been heavily injured by the Demon Lord. They had watched him break into star condensation and then collapse, but they had no idea that the problem was so serious. Because Chen Chongqing did not say, they did not ask. Even now, they still did not ask what had happened, only looked at him. There were some matters that still needed to be explained, because only by explaining clearly could the confession be considered complete. Chen Chongqing looked at the four and said, "I have an illness that was brought out of my mother's womb. My meridians have always had problems. I knew a long time ago that I wouldn't live past 20, but I never told you. This is my fault. I originally thought that I could resolve this problem, but I didn't think that my illness would break out on Mount Han. My meridians would shatter and there would be no way to reconnect them, so I might die." "Just what do you want to say? Were those words just now your last words?" Tang 36's sword-like eyebrows arched as he taunted, "If you're sick, go find a doctor. What's the point in playing grief-stricken with us?" The taunt was only to conceal the unease and fear he felt upon hearing those words, as well as the inexplicable anger. "I am the best doctor." Chen Chongqing looked at him and explained. His voice was calm and his expression was sincere. He wasn't boasting, he was merely stating the facts. However, it was still the same as before, leaving others speechless. If it weren't for the special circumstances, perhaps Tang 36 would have made a rather intense reaction, but now, he only remained silent. "Pope?" Zhixiu suddenly asked. Chen Chongqing shook his head. Su Muyu said, "What about the Holy Maiden? Her sacred light technique can be said to be unparalleled in the world, so why can't she cure your illness?" Tang 36 also thought the same. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly remembered something and swallowed his words. In the 10,000-li journey back from Mount Han, he and Zhixiu had seen with their own eyes that Su Yorong had not taken a single step away from Chen Chongqing's side. And then they thought about how, after returning to the capital, Su Yorong had ignored those rumors and disregarded the face of the divine general of the East's estate to remain in the Orthodox Academy. This indicated that she had long known of this matter, and that she had no way of resolving it. The entire place fell into silence once more, and everyone's expressions turned extremely unsightly. Chen Chongqing apologetically said, "I'm sorry." Tang 36 could no longer suppress the emotions in his heart. Clenching his teeth, he coldly said, "You're going to die, so who are you apologizing to? Of all the things in the world, only death is one's own business, but I feel that there's a problem with your attitude." After learning of this shocking news, Zhixiu was the calmest. He looked into Chen Chongqing's eyes and said, "Since you're still alive, you can't think of yourself as a dead man. Even if you can only live these last few days with the thought that you're going to die, you still have to place the emphasis on that last word." Chen Chongqing understood what he meant. In the snowy plains of the north, Zhixiu, who had been driven away by the wolf tribe, had an evil illness, but he had still continued to fight. He had the most experience with this sort of thing. "Yes, but I still have to make some preparations ahead of time. There are a few things that need to be arranged." Chen Chongqing looked towards Tang 36 and said, "Yorong, she and I had an engagement. She was my fiancée, and although the engagement has been annulled, and it seems that I have no way of marrying her, I will still treat her as my wife. However, the division of property was already clearly divided at the beginning of the year. I will organize a few things, and when the time comes, help me give them to her." Out of habit, Tang 36 wanted to say a few words of ridicule. For example, "How could someone as poor as you have any valuable belongings?" But in the end, he didn't say anything, only silently nodding his head. Chen Chongqing continued, "Luo Luo is my student. Leave a third of my property for her, a third for my senior, and a third for the academy. Those students from poorer families can apply to use it. As for the two of you, I've given you swords, so I won't leave anything else." Zhixiu and Xian Yuanpo weren't wealthy, but with Tang 36 here, he didn't need to worry. "Orthodox Academy is really letting me take over?" Su Mou said, "I'm a little uneasy, because this burden is a little heavy." As he said this, he looked towards the distant students reading in the corridors of the building. Last autumn, the Orthodox Academy accepted over 100 new students. According to the rules of the Zhou dynasty and the Orthodoxy, these new students could no longer transfer to another academy. In other words, they had linked their fate with the fate of the Orthodox Academy. If Chen Chongqing really did die, the Orthodox Academy naturally wouldn't have its current glory, so how long could it last? "Let me do it," Tang 36 expressionlessly said. "It can't be helped. I was born to be the main character. Besides, if the principal dies, I, the academy superintendent, will have to step in." Hearing this, Chen Chongqing was slightly surprised. After the long conversation by the lake, He knew better than anyone how much pressure Tang 36 was under. He lived a free life in the capital and in the Orthodox Academy, but as he grew up, the Wenshui Tangs would definitely ask him to return as soon as possible to inherit the family business. Tang 36 said, "Although that old man of mine isn't talented, he's still my old man. Besides, the old man's body seems to be pretty good, so there shouldn't be too much of a rush." Chen Chongqing knew that this was a lie. Even if the Wenshui Tangs weren't in a rush to raise a successor, they still weren't willing to see Tang 36 in danger and remain in the capital for a long time. "If you really do die, they should be able to understand if I return 2 years later," Tang 36 sternly said, "so you absolutely can't lie to me. When the time comes, you'll definitely die." This was naturally a joke, but it wasn't funny. It was very stiff, especially at a time like this. It was as stiff as an iced steamed bun that had been left out for 2 nights, choking to the point of speechlessness. Suemo Yu looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "Relax, I'll stay behind to watch over him." Zhixio said, "If you die after I finish that matter, I'll return to the north." He was a wolf from the north. He would only occasionally stop in the bustling capital to treat his injuries. Once he recovered, he would naturally leave. But what matter did he want to finish? The mood was rather oppressive and heavy, and Zhixio's words only added a chill. They all knew that before Zhixio left the capital, he had to do one thing: kill Zhou Tong. Chen Chongqing was the first new student of the Orthodox Academy after 10-odd years. It was precisely because of him that the Orthodox Academy had been reborn. If one had to say what he couldn't let go of in the capital, besides those people, it was naturally this quiet and secluded academy. After he left this world, would the Orthodox Academy still be able to exist? Would it still be able to exist as it was now? Tang 36 and Suemo Yu gave their promises. After Tang 36 promised to give him enough money, Zhixio told Chen Chongqing that he could kill at any time for the Orthodox Academy and asked him to leave in peace. At that moment, Chen Chongqing felt that he should close his eyes and pretend that he had passed away. When they turned to Xian Yuanpo, wanting to know his plans, Xian Yuanpo suddenly said a few words and then left. The words he said were, "I'm leaving." Xian Yuanpo left very quickly, without the slightest hesitation or sloppiness. It was like someone was chasing after him, or like the Orthodox Academy was about to collapse. Is this the saying, "When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter"? After confirming that Xian Yuanpo had even taken the heavy black iron sword from the kitchen, Tang 36 sucked in a breath of cold air. Zhixio expressionlessly said, "He's clearly in a hurry to return to White Emperor City." Tang 36 asked in confusion, "Why does he want to return to White Emperor City?" "To find Princess Luoluo and tell her that Chen Chongqing is about to die. Only Princess Luoluo can invite His Majesty, the White Emperor, to the capital to treat Chen Chongqing's illness." After saying this, Zhixio turned to Chen Chongqing and continued, "You see, many people don't want you to die, and Princess Luoluo definitely doesn't want you to die either. And don't forget, you have to treat my illness. If you die, I might also die in 2 years, so it's best if you live." Chen Chongqing replied, "I will do my best." The heavenly Tao, or perhaps fate, had always been unfair and cruel to him, but this world was not bad to him. Many people were unwilling to see him leave, such as Luoluo, Xian Yuanpo, and Tang 36. And if he died, what would happen to Zhixio? What would happen to the Black Dragon? Who would care about her? Just as he was thinking about these things, a guest came to the Orthodox Academy. This guest had an esteemed status, but it was also an enormous problem. If Su Yorong had not been summoned into the imperial palace and Chen Chongqing was still in the building, then he would definitely not have been able to meet with Prince Chen Lu, much less speak with him. "You are really Xiaoming?" Sunlight seeped through the water of the fountain and fell upon Prince Chen Lu's handsome face, transforming into many motes of light that formed a complex design. It was just like his current expression, complex and sorrowful. In the past 2 years, Chen Chongqing and this representative of the Chen imperial clan had not met many times, but they had gotten along very well. He had not expected that this person would so directly ask this question. Chapter 6:10. I don't know. Chen Chongqing could not admit or deny it because even now, he had not been able to confirm his origins. The only thing he could confirm was that he was also a member of the Chen imperial clan. To put it another way, he and the Prince Chen Lu in front of him were brothers. From friends to brothers, this sort of feeling was rather strange. Perhaps Prince Chen Lu had sensed his current mood, but he changed the topic. Ever since Crown Prince Xiaoming was born, his body has never been good. At the time, I was still young and lived in the imperial palace the entire time, but I never had the chance to see him. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, if I really am Crown Prince Xiaoming, and my son will collapsed in the Divine Empress's stomach, then my body naturally can't be too good. If you really were Crown Prince Xiaoming, what would you do? Prince Chen Lu's voice suddenly became light, but the gaze with which he gazed at Chen Chongqing began to blaze, brimming with hope and desire. Chen Chongqing did not know how to answer this question. Only at this moment did he suddenly understand that the most important aspect of Crown Prince Xiaoming's identity was, he was the legal successor to the throne of the Great Zhou. No matter what the Divine Empress has done in these past few years, no matter how many elders of the imperial clan she has killed, there is one thing that cannot be denied. She is Emperor Xian's wife, Crown Prince Xiaoming is her son, and also Emperor Xian's son. If the throne of the Great Zhou is empty, there is no one more qualified than Crown Prince Xiaoming to sit on it. Prince Chen Lu stared into his eyes and spoke with extreme seriousness. Because Chen Chongqing had not admitted that he was Crown Prince Xiaoming, he did not directly say you but Crown Prince Xiaoming. But his intentions had long since been made as clear as day, and anyone could understand. The Divine Empress had ruled for more than 200 years, managing the entire imperial court like an iron board. In these 10-odd years, through the use of several major cases and Zhou Tong's methods, the Chen imperial clan had been suppressed into an extremely miserable state. At present, it was impossible to see the slightest influence of the Chen imperial clan in the capital. At least on the surface, Prince Chen Lu, the sole descendant, was only a sliver of face that the Divine Empress had left for the imperial clan, a bit of comfort for the common people. It was mostly just a symbol. He was completely like a lonely ghost without any strength. However, when they emerged from Tianliang County and possessed the world, they had produced Qin Xuanba, the former crown prince, and Emperor Taizong. The resources of the Chen imperial clan far surpassed the imagination of the common people, so how could they be so easily purged? They were assuredly concealing a great deal of strength in the capital. That strength might be hidden in the orthodoxy, the imperial court, or even the imperial palace. And in the counties outside the capital, the strength of the imperial clan was preserved rather well, even capable of shaking the imperial court. For example, in Tianliang County, if the Great Zhou truly did fall into turmoil, both the officials and the common people of the county would firmly stand on the side of the Chen imperial clan. The Chen imperial clan had several hundred descendants scattered throughout the various provinces and counties, each forming a faction. The strongest faction was the Prince of Xiang's faction. The Prince of Xiang was Prince Chen Lu's father. It was unknown whether the words that Prince Chen Lu said to Chen Chongqing had been approved by the Prince of Xiang, but he had the right to speak on behalf of the Prince of Xiang. If Chen Chongqing really was Crown Prince Xiaoming and really wanted to ascend to the throne of the Great Zhou, obtaining the support of the Prince of Xiang's faction was an extremely important matter. Yet Chen Chongqing showed no reaction. Prince Chen Lu's eyes revealed regret and confusion. Who did not want the throne of the Great Zhou? Chen Chongqing did not want it, at least not now. He was in no mood to ponder these so-called major matters. This was the principle that there were no major matters before life and death. Prince Chen Lu could not remain in the Orthodox Academy for long. With the rumor that Chen Chongqing was Crown Prince Xiaoming, this sort of meeting had always been taboo. The Divine Empress's people were assuredly watching the Orthodox Academy, as that imperial decree from before was proof. He looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "Don't stand on the Empress's side because of your own. Don't be in a rush to make a decision. Watch more, think more, see just what my great Zhou dynasty needs right now." Chen Chongqing gazed at his handsome face, at the unswerving determination on his brow, and thought back to the rumor that he had heard when he first entered the capital that the Empress regarded Prince Chen Lu with great importance. He was rather confused. Prince Chen Lu seemed to know what he was thinking and said, "The Empress treated me well, but she was wrong." Chen Chongqing did not ask who was right and wrong, because everyone had their own judgment of the situation in court over the last few years, and everyone had their own eyes. The Empress's mistake was not in using Zhou Yong, not in using Qing Jun, not in using the so-called 8 tigers. As Prince Chen Lu spoke of the names of those famous treacherous officials, his expression became more solemn. The Empress's mistake was not in using the wrong people, not in using the wrong people, but in wanting to use these people, purposely using these people. She did not care about anyone's life or death, only about her own power and position. She put all her energy into the court, killing countless people that she thought were her enemies, but she forgot where the true enemies of my great Zhou dynasty were. The great Zhou was the legitimate dynasty of the human world, representing the fundamental interests of the entire human race. Its enemies were of course in the north, the demons. Look at the mountains and rivers of the last 200 years. The great Zhou dynasty is at its peak, but it has not advanced an inch in the north, and has even lost many times. Its people are still bitterly suffering in the wind and snow, but they are still occasionally seized by the demons to be used as army rations. Why did such a situation occur? Because the Empress's thoughts were simply not placed there. Prince Chen Lu looked into his eyes and harshly said, "No matter how high her cultivation, how powerful her strength, how outstanding her scheming, she is still a woman. Her vision and ability to plan are inherently lacking. She cannot lead us to victory in this war, so she has no right to continue sitting on the imperial throne." The sun gradually moved west. It was not yet dusk, but the sky was already tinged with a warm red. Chen Chongqing walked back to the side of the cloth. Under the uneasy and hesitant gazes of the South Stream Temple disciples, he climbed up the great banyan tree and stood on the tree's arm, gazing into the distance. The capital was shrouded in the early autumn sunlight. Black eaves and white walls could be seen everywhere. The streets were filled with people, and the streets were bustling with activity, peaceful and joyous. The people living here found it very difficult to imagine what sort of pressure the human armies endured in the snowy plains of the north, what sort of miserable days the people there lived. Just as the people living in the modern world had probably long forgotten, 1,000 years ago, the vanguard of the demon army had besieged Luoyang for 3 whole months, and the vanguard was only 400 li from the capital. Thinking of Prince Chen Lu's previous words, he was silent for a very long time. Then he stopped thinking about it and began to think about his own matters. The great banyan tree was by the lake. The lake was in the Tradition Academy. There was green grass here. He had already lived here for more than 2 years. When he first came here, the name of the Tradition Academy engraved on the stone had been completely covered by ivy. This was the old garden that had been forgotten. Here he met the black goat and the granny from the palace. Later on, he saw the granny from afar in the imperial palace, but he had almost forgotten what she looked like. The bamboo carriage pulled by the black goat was not the granny's, but Mou's. He had not seen Mou for a very long time. He had not smelled her scent on the bed for a very long time. Perhaps it was because of Su Yurong? At the time, there was only him in the Tradition Academy. On the other side of the wall was the 100 herb garden. A little girl climbed over the wall, so the Tradition Academy had one more person. Then, Xian Yuan Pu came, Tang 36 came, and then Zhishio and Sumo Yu came. After the recruitment last autumn, this place became even more lively. Thinking of the time he spent here with Luo Luo, he felt like it was a lifetime ago. Xian Yuan Pu had already left. He was probably madly running towards the Red River. If Luo Luo knew, she would probably be very sad. Thinking of this, Chen Chongqing felt somewhat comforted. Then he realized that he could not achieve a heart as still as water. He still cared about some things. Tragedy was tearing a beautiful place to pieces for others to see. Sorrow was seeing a beautiful place but being unable to approach it. In the end, he was forced to turn and leave, never to be seen again. Looking at the capital under the autumn sun, thinking that he was about to leave this beautiful world, he officially began to feel sorrow. He looked into the distance and suddenly shouted twice. There was no specific meaning, he just shouted to prove his existence. The disciples of South Stream Temple and the students of the Tradition Academy looked at him on the great banyan tree. His figure seemed to melt into the sunlight. After hearing the shout, they were even more shocked. The disciples of South Stream Temple thought, how could the holy maiden like this kind of person? The students of the Tradition Academy thought, so the principal is this kind of person. Tang 36, Zhishio, and Sumo Yu looked at him with grave expressions and heavy hearts. If you knew that you only had a few dozen days left to live, how would you spend this time? Would you make a wish list of the things you most wanted to do, and then sell your house and land to fulfill them one by one? Or would you hide in a dark corner of your room and wash your face with tears every day? Or would you disregard all moral rules and indulge the desires and evil in the depths of your heart? While Chen Chongqing was standing on the great banyan tree by the lake in the Tradition Academy, pondering this question, in the prison of the Department for Purging officials deep within the alley of the Northern Military Department, the former imperial physician, Lord Sun, and the former official of the Bureau of Rights, Lord Yang Xioshan, were also facing this question. However, they did not have the energy to think about how they would spend these next few days. They only wanted to reduce these days as much as possible. Ever since they had been secretly imprisoned in Zhou prison, they had wanted to die. The earlier they died, the better, because in this place, life was truly worse than death. The sharp iron wire was pierced into Yang Xioshan's left ear and then came out from the other side of his right ear, bringing out something similar to brain juice. However, there was not much blood. This was because he had already lost too much blood in the past few days, or perhaps it was because his hot blood had already gradually dissipated from the torture of the past few days. Chapter 6:11. His hot blood gradually dispersed. During the execution, it was very difficult to hear his powerful curses and recitation of the laws of the Great Zhou, but Yang Xioshan's breath was still there. Although he was on the verge of death, exhaling more than he exhaled, his breath like gossamer, his bones were still hard, even though some of his ribs had been broken long ago. Yang Xioshan had never participated in the grand examination. He had entered the court through the ordinary imperial examination to become an official, and only after many years of hard work did he obtain the Divine Empress's appreciation, allowing him to become a civil official of the palace. In everyone's view, he should be thanking the Divine Empress for her kindness, but he continued to act as he did in the past, quietly doing his own work, recording everything that happened in the imperial palace. Only in the autumn of the 4th year after the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy did he suddenly submit a memorial. This memorial was directed at Zhou Tong, and at the end, it also criticized the Divine Empress. The Divine Empress was very unhappy and had him imprisoned in Zhou prison. He suffered countless torments in prison, but he ultimately managed to endure and survive. In the end, he was pardoned, released, and transferred to the Bureau of Rights. That was a matter from some years ago. 10 years later, he was once more imprisoned in Zhou prison. This time, there were no more colleagues in the court to cry out for him, and the divine empress seemed to have forgotten his existence. Zhou Tong looked through the bars at that mangled body lying on the grass. He squinted his eyes for a very long time before finally confirming that this was his greatest enemy from back then. Lord Yang truly is a loyal and chaste man. Even after suffering so much torture, you're still not willing to say a single word. Zhou Tong continued, but you're not the only one who knows of that matter back then. Hearing his voice, Yang Xiushan struggled to move on the grass. Dr. Sun has spoken. Zhou Tong stood up, clasped his hands behind his back, and walked out of the prison. I came today only to bid farewell to you. Hearing these words, Yang Xiushan's body tensed and then suddenly relaxed. He had persisted until now, and now he finally had a reason not to persist. Of course, this did not mean that he would say anything, only that he could rest. In the gloomy prison cell came the sound of heavy objects being moved. Tensome sacks filled with sand were carried in by the officials of the Department for Purging Officials and then placed on Yang Xiushan's body. At the very start, Yang Xiushan's body would still twitch a few times and let out indistinct noises. Ultimately, his voice grew softer and softer until it stopped. Black, almost congealed blood seeped out from his eyes and nostrils. It was as if he wanted to see if there was a heavenly Tao in this world, if there was any justice. Even if he died, he still had to keep his eyes open, as if he wanted to see if there was a heavenly Tao in this world, and if there was any justice. The autumn sun set in the courtyard. There were no flowers on the crabapple tree, but it was still beautiful. Zhou Tong stood under the crabapple tree, his face slightly pale. It was probably because he hadn't seen the sun for many years. An official of the Department for Purging Officials stood behind him, his body and mind so cold that not even the sunlight could warm him up. An official of the Imperial Court had died in Zhou prison. Logically speaking, this was a very normal matter. Similar matters had occurred many times before, but this official of the Department for Purging Officials was Zhou Tong's most trusted subordinate and had followed him for several decades. He knew that this time was different from the past. In the past, those officials of the Imperial Court that had died in Zhou prison had not been properly tried. Logically speaking, this was a grave violation of the laws of Zhou, but it did not go against the Divine Empress's will. The Divine Empress did not want to see those officials again, so those officials would quietly die. But this time was different. He was keenly aware that Lord Zhou Tong was privately investigating something. The Divine Empress did not know of it, nor did she know of the news of Yang Xiushan's death. He gazed at Zhou Tong, his gaze falling upon that crimson official's robe. He did not see the endless sea of blood or the monstrous killing intent as he normally did, but he faintly felt a sense of unease and even fear. Why was Lord Zhou Tong doing this? Just what did he want to know by taking the risk of the Empress' rage and secretly interrogating so many people? What is he afraid of? If Black Robe could be said to be the person with the most secrets in the world, then Zhou Tong could be said to be the person who grasped the most secrets in the world. To him, secrets were like gold and silver, or like power and status. The more he had, the better. The more he had, the safer he would feel. Starting from a year ago, he had begun to attempt to discover the secrets on Chen Chongqing's body, but alas, he had never made much progress. The only progress he had made was because it involved the Imperial Palace and was highly likely to discover the Divine Empress's secret, so he had been forced to stop. However, no one knew that he had always been secretly investigating. He was the person who had first suspected that Chen Chongqing was Crown Prince Xiaoming. The rumor that had suddenly spread through the capital last year had originally been deliberately spread by him. The secret that he most wanted to know was this matter. At the time, he had only guessed, but he had not been able to confirm it, because there were many areas that were difficult to understand. If Chen Chongqing really was Crown Prince Xiaoming, why had Shang Xingzhou sent him to the capital, to the Empress? The most dangerous place was the safest place? Moreover, Chen Chongqing's age did not match with Crown Prince Xiaoming's. On the contrary, that little fellow called you Rin did. When false becomes true, true becomes false. Everyone who had met Chen Chongqing said that he matured early, that he was calm and composed, and that he did not seem like a youth. Before Mei Lisha died, he was still reading the scroll of time. Many clues were gathered in this courtyard of blooming crabapple blossoms, and countless details gradually began to weave together in his mind. In the end, all of this pointed to an unbelievable deduction. Chen Chongqing was Crown Prince Xiaoming, and his age had been forcefully changed by the scroll of time. This deduction was too wild and inconceivable. He still found it impossible to believe, so he continued to investigate in secret. But he had searched through all the secret records of the palace and found nothing. He had secretly imprisoned many people who had been involved in this matter, including the midwife who had delivered the child and those old people of the Imperial Physician Bureau who had retired long ago. Only today did he finally confirm that when Crown Prince Xiaoming was born, the sun wheel in his body had already ruptured. If it were merely this discovery, it would not have moved him. This was because he knew that the Divine Empress had once defied the heavens and changed her fate. When she sacrificed herself to the starry sky, she had sworn an incomparably vicious oath that she was fated to die of old age, so she naturally could not leave behind any children. Before the inconspicuously moving yet irreversible heavenly Tao, Crown Prince Xiaoming would naturally die. But a few days ago, he had seen a secret message between the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Imperial Palace and learned of another secret. Chen Chongqing was a member of the Imperial clan and he was sick. His illness originated from when he was still in his mother's womb. The sun wheel in his body had already ruptured. Just like Crown Prince Xiaoming, Zhou Tong began to feel uneasy, even fearful. If Chen Chongqing really was Crown Prince Xiaoming, and he was still alive, what did that mean? It meant that the Divine Empress had not completely succeeded in changing her fate. As long as Chen Chongqing was alive, the Divine Empress might suffer a backlash from the heavenly Tao. If this matter was used by those opponents hidden in the shadows, would the Divine Empress still be able to sit peacefully on the imperial throne? Zhou Tong was keenly aware of what sort of miserable end he would face if the Empress lost power. He was also loyal to the Empress, but he was different from Xue Xingchuan and the other divine generals. Those divine generals had armies under their command. If the Chern imperial clan regained the imperial throne, for the sake of stabilizing the situation, as long as those divine generals were willing to switch allegiances, they would absolutely not suffer any attacks. At the very least, there would be no problems for the next several years. But no one would permit him to live. Everyone knew that he was the Divine Empress's most loyal and craziest dog. He had bitten too many people to death for the Empress, shouldered too many debts of blood. He did not want to die. Even a dog had a desire to live out an ignoble existence. How could this matter be resolved? It seemed very simple. Just as many people thought, the Divine Empress only needed to kill Chen Chongqing. In the eyes of everyone in the world, the Divine Empress was callous to the extreme and simply did not care about these matters. But Zhou Tong had followed the Empress for many years and knew that those legends among the people were not completely true. The Empress truly did not have a bloodline to pass down, and the Princess of Ping had been adopted, but when had she ever personally smothered her own son to death? In the end, the Empress was still a woman. If she really did discover that Chen Chongqing was her own son and her heart softened, what would happen? Her heart could not be softened, she could not disregard the heavenly Tao, she could not take risks. Zhou Tong's complexion grew paler and paler. His red official's gown slightly trembled, stirring up bloody waves in the early autumn sun. Let me share the Empress's burden, he silently thought to himself. Chapter 6:12. If he really is Crown Prince Xiaoming, I think that there are probably many people who want him dead. Although those people might already know that he is about to die, my lady should be well aware that the lives of their clans and even the 1,000 generations of their clans depend on my lady. They will not take any risks, will not allow him to live another day. Su Yorong calmly continued, so I cannot leave the Orthodox Academy, and the sword array of South Stream Temple will never be lifted. The elegant celestial porcelain cup slowly turned between her fingers, like a water wheel being pushed by a stream, smooth and silent. The divine empress gazed at the cup between her fingers, revealing a smile that seemed to contain a deep meaning, but she said nothing. The celestial porcelain cup was very beautiful and seemed very hard, but to her, she only needed a thought to crush it into powder. Su Yorong had never hoped that the divine empress would save Chen Chongqing, even if he might be her own son. Moreover, the Pope might not be able to do anything about Chen Chongqing's illness, and the empress might not be able to either. But she hoped that in the last years of Chen Chongqing's life, he would be able to enjoy a beautiful and undisturbed period of time. From the age of 10, Chen Chongqing had always endured the shadow of death, arduously advancing without any time to catch his breath. Every time she thought of this matter, she would feel somewhat sad. If my lady agrees, I will take him with me and leave the capital tomorrow, Su Yorong said to the divine empress. The divine empress's smile faded, her expression indifferent as she said, if he really is my son, then every day he lives is a day that I will be uneasy. Su Yorong replied, on the way back from Mount Han, I searched through all the scriptures of the church. There is no proof of the backlash of the heavenly Tao. That's because neither Emperor Taizu nor Taizong violated the oath they made back then. The former caused the death of all his children except Taizong, while the latter killed all those elders in the portraits in the Lingyan pavilion. If not for Wang Zhica's quick escape, Taizong might really have been able to last through the autumn and for 10,000 generations, still sitting on my position. When she mentioned Taizu and Emperor Taizong, she was not very respectful, especially when she mentioned Emperor Taizong, who was revered by the people. Her tone was filled with ridicule and disdain. 2 years ago, when Chen Chongqing lit up his destined star in the library of the Tradition Academy, Mou and I were coincidentally on the due platform. At that time, I said, destined star can also be the fated nemesis. If it is fated between me and him, only one can live. Do you think the heavens will let him die or me die? The divine empress's voice gradually grew cold. Su Yorong was well aware that before the heavenly Tao made its final judgment, the empress would give an answer herself. The divine empress stood up and motioned for her not to say anything more. She walked to the window with her hands behind her back and gazed at the burning sky. Su Yorong also walked to the window and gazed at the bright red sky. She narrowed her eyes and subconsciously put her hands behind her back. Looking at them from the back, their postures were exactly the same, as if they were replicas. They also looked like a pair of mother and daughter. The divine empress said, no matter how you look at it, you are more like my daughter than Pingguo. Pingguo was the daughter she adopted from the family of Tianhai. Their blood relationship was very close and their appearance was also somewhat similar. When she was young, she was one of the most famous beauties in the world. Su Yorong was now recognized as the most beautiful girl, but they were both extremely beautiful but not alike. But just as she said, no matter how you look at it, Su Yorong looked like her own daughter. That was because their temperament, and spirit were similar. In reality, I have always treated you as my daughter because we have the same blood. The divine empress looked at the burning clouds in the sky. Her beautiful face shone with dazzling light. She was extremely confident. Back then, I sacrificed the starry sky to change my fate. I was willing to die without descendants to ascend to the throne. I have never regretted this, because I know very well that even the heavenly Tao cannot stop the rebirth of the phoenix. The burning cloud slowly moved west in the sky. It looked like a phoenix breaking out of the fire. You are my descendant, my successor. The divine empress looked at Su Yorong and said indifferently, as for whether he is my son or not, I don't care. Su Yorong thought, after all, He is your own flesh and blood. Don't you have any feelings for him? I taught you for so many years, but now it seems that teacher of yours has taught you back." The divine empress expressionlessly said, "Feelings are the cheapest thing in the world. Morality is only an excuse for the weak to protect themselves. None of this is important." Su Yorong asked, "Then what is the most important thing?" The divine empress looked at the sky and leisurely said, "Existence." Su Yorong thought for a while, then said, "How should we exist?" How to exist, each with its own wonders. Whether one can exist for a long time, how the soul cannot be extinguished, these are the great Tao. All things have a beginning and an end. Even those above the concealed divinity, who have obtained great freedom, will still be born and extinguished. Things are easy to decay, but their shadows cannot be extinguished. In the end, it all depends on the thickness of those marks. The divine empress turned around and looked at her. "And those marks come from our footsteps, following the direction of our hearts." Su Yorong asked, "What if someone blocks the path?" The divine empress replied, "So we need the ability to kill all those who block our path. Only in this way can we bring this world forward according to our will, branding our souls into history. Even if tens of thousands of people curse us, it will not be able to erase us. Only in this way can we approach true eternity." Su Yorong was somewhat confused. Frowning, she asked, "If everyone opposes it, how can we kill them all?" "Of course we can kill them all. This is a very simple matter." The divine empress's voice echoed through the empty palace hall. "First kill them all over there." She looked to the distant north, as if speaking to the year-round snowstorm. "Then kill them all over there." She looked to the distant west, as if making a declaration to the boundless ocean. "Then kill them all over there." She drew back her gaze and turned to a certain place in the capital. With her words, the trees lining the divine path of the Li Palace suddenly began to move despite the absence of wind. Countless green leaves rustled to the ground. Finally, "Kill them all over there." She looked to the sky, her gaze very deep, as if she wanted to see through this burning sky. Twilight gradually retreated and night came. The restaurants outside the Orthodox Academy continued to close, and 100 Flowers Lane was very quiet. Only the occasional shouts from those peddlers could be heard. However, they had received a warning from the Orthodoxy cavalry and knew that the Holy Maiden and the disciples of South Stream Temple were currently residing in the Orthodox Academy, so their shouts were very restrained and not loud. An old man selling gardenias borrowed the cover of the darkness to arrive in front of the walls of the Orthodox Academy. It seemed like he was about to relieve himself, but he suddenly vanished. The food delivery carriage of Clear Lake Restaurant entered the Orthodox Academy through the back gate. More midnight snacks than usual were carefully carried into the kitchen by the cooks for the students and disciples of South Stream Temple to eat at night. A middle-aged man delivering the food chatted with a cook and then vanished into the gray walls outside. Similar scenes occurred in many places, but no one paid any attention to them. There were a total of 14 people who had infiltrated the Orthodox Academy under the cover of the night. They were all assassins and killers. Besides the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and Black Robe, in the entire continent, only the Department for Purging officials could find so many powerful assassins and killers in such a short amount of time. The female disciples of South Stream Temple had extremely high cultivations and powerful swordplay, and the sword array they had laid down was even more powerful. However, they were still disciples of the Taoist sect that cultivated in seclusion in the mountains, so they were extremely lacking in experience. Moreover, the walls of the Orthodox Academy were connected for 10 some li. No matter how tight the patrols of the Orthodoxy cavalry were, they could not possibly control every single area. Not everyone in the Orthodox Academy had not noticed the infiltration of these assassins. Just when the old man selling gardenias arrived in front of the walls of the Orthodox Academy, Zheshio opened his eyes. He was not in the building, but on the great banyan tree by the lake. During the day, Chern Chongsheng had given his last words, as well as many other things. Tang 36 and Su Moyu were very quiet. After Xian Yuan ran away, Zhixio said nothing. He climbed the tree, hugged the demon commander's banner sword, and began to sleep. Behind him was the sword array of South Stream Temple, and behind him was the small building. Chen Chongqing was inside. If they wanted to kill Chen Chongqing, they first had to get past him. In the proclamation of Azure Sky, he was ranked second, the only young genius that could threaten Su Yurong's position. It was not because of his high cultivation, but because of his extremely powerful battle prowess. At present, in the Orthodox Academy, his cultivation was not the highest, but if magical artifacts and other items were not taken into account, not even Chen Chongqing was a match for him. This was because he had lived in the desolate and dangerous snowy plains since he was a child, a wolf cub that had survived in the face of death. Last autumn, in front of the Orthodox Academy, Chen Chongqing had broken through the star domain with a single strike, shocking everyone present. At the time, he had said that there were at least 5 people that could do what he had done, defeat a star condensation cultivator at ethereal opening. The 5 people he spoke of were Qiushan Jun, Su Yurong, Go Hanshi himself, and Zhixio. Zhixio was extremely sensitive to danger. He expressionlessly gazed at the Orthodox Academy in the darkness. It did not take long for him to discover the traces of at least 7 assassins. However, what happened next was extremely strange, because those assassins began to collapse one by one. Some collapsed in the weeds, some collapsed in the depths of the forest. One assassin borrowed the water to escape, but sank, never to rise again. Under the starlight, only a few faint smears of red could be seen in the lake. Only then did Zhixio realize that the Orthodox Academy was actually concealing so many experts. Although these experts were clearly friends and not enemies, they still made him feel a chill. A carriage stopped outside 100 Flowers Lane. The light in the carriage was very dim, illuminating the white paper on the table with a yellowish tint and the words on it with a bluish tint. The 2 officials of the Department for Purging Officials, on the other hand, grew paler and paler. Without question, ever since the Divine Empress had come to power, the government office in the alley of the Northern Military Department had become the most sinister and unbridled place in the entire continent. But tonight, the person that the Department for Purging Officials wanted to kill was not an ordinary person, but the future Pope. When they thought of this fact, these 2 officials still felt incomparably nervous and afraid. Not a single one of the assassins that had infiltrated the Orthodox Academy had returned. Even more terrifying was that not a single sound could be heard from the Orthodox Academy, as if no battle was taking place. The darkness enveloping the Orthodox Academy was like an abyss, noiselessly swallowing the lives of 10 some of the most extraordinary assassins of the Department for Purging Officials. Chapter 6:13. Time continued to pass. The 2 officials of the Department for Purging Officials in the carriage grew even paler. Without further delay, they left 100 Flowers Lane. The starlight shone on Zhou Prison, on the crabapple tree, and on Zhou Tong's crimson official's gown. It was like hell, like a fairyland, like a sea of blood. As he listened to his subordinate's report, his face showed no change of expression, just like a dead man. The Orthodox Academy had the sword array of South Stream Temple inside, and the Orthodoxy cavalry outside. The Li Palace seemed to have done nothing, but in reality, they had long since made preparations. Mao Chuyu had been in that inn in 100 Flowers Lane the entire time, his sleeves untainted by the wind, but he had a divine artifact on him. There were still 18 cardinals in the Orthodox Academy, and in the darkness, there were still a few experts that Mei Lisha had left behind. Zhou Tong had used the lives of 10 some elite assassins to confirm these facts. With this sort of force, even if the Divine Empress truly mobilized the Imperial Guard, she still might not be able to kill Chen Chongqing unless she personally moved, and it had to be done in the shortest amount of time. Otherwise, the Pope would assuredly appear. He had never expected to be able to kill Chen Chongqing tonight. He had only probed and concluded that it was no good. He had to find another method. In a certain manner, on the outskirts of the capital, a few people were also discussing the same matter. This won't do. It's too difficult to break into the Orthodox Academy without drawing attention. The clan has spent so much money in these past few years. Has it all been fed to dogs? If it were anything else, it would probably be possible, but this is no small matter. You first have to tell me just how many people we have in the Orthodox Academy. We truly do have spies in the Orthodox Academy, and we also have spies in the Orthodoxy Cavalry. We can even find friends in the Li Palace who are willing to help us, but Su Yurong's response was simple but extremely effective. As long as the sword array of South Stream Temple exists, we have no way of approaching the house. I don't believe that the sword array formed by those girls can stop us. Seeing the excited expression on his nephew's face, Tianhai Chenwu slightly creased his brow. He raised his right hand to stop the argument in the hall and asked, "Are you surnamed Zhou, Wang, or Su?" Zhou was Zhou Dufu, Wang was Wang Jitsa, and Su was Su Li. In the past 1,000 years, only these three people had charged into Holy Maiden Peak and broken through the sword array of South Stream Temple. Yet even they had spent a very long time and expended a great deal of effort. Who in the Tianhai clan could compare to these three legendary figures? And who had the confidence to break through South Stream Temple's sword array before the Pope's divine manifestation, enter the house and kill Chen Chongsheng? Hearing this, the nephew was speechless. His face turned red and he lowered his head. Tianhai Chenwu glanced at his son, who had remained silent all this time, then said indifferently to his clansmen, "The Saintess is wise, and her skill in deduction is unparalleled. How could there be any loopholes? The orthodoxy will naturally protect Chen Chongsheng." The Holy Maiden thought that with her willingness to protect Chen Chongsheng, the Divine Empress would perhaps be somewhat fearful and would not personally act, so Chen Chongsheng would be safe. But she forgot one thing, and that is, Chen Chongsheng is not a dead person. Zhou Tong expressionlessly looked at his subordinates and said, "Since he's not a dead person, he assuredly has his own thoughts. If he himself wants to leave the Orthodox Academy, who can stop him?" The subordinates did not understand and asked, "Why did he come out?" Zhou Tong stood in front of the courtyard and looked at the crabapple tree, not saying anything. He had seen the message between the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Imperial Palace. In the message, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had said that Chen Chongsheng was about to die. He knew that people like Chen Chongsheng would definitely not die quietly like this. The wine cup fell on the hard pearwood table, giving off a dull and somewhat clear sound. Tianhai Xingxue, who had just returned to the capital from Snowhold Pass, raised his head and jeered at his clansmen in the hall. Finally, his gaze fell on his father and he said, "We can only wait for him to walk out of the Orthodox Academy himself." Tianhai Chenwu's expression softened, somewhat gratified. But in the next moment the gratification vanished with the wind. His expression became solemn once more and his voice became cold. "He will come out. As long as he takes one step out of the Orthodox Academy, kill him." The night was just as peaceful as before, as peaceful as ever. It was like those fallen figures were just an illusion, like there had not been many terrifying assassins that had come and then been killed one by one. Zheshio calmly gazed at the lakeshore, confirming that the assassins were all dead. However, his mood did not relax. He was still rather worried. He slid down from the banyan tree and walked towards the house. Countless sword intents remained hidden, secretly following the laws of the world and interweaving in the space around the house. If someone were to intrude, they would assuredly activate countless terrifying sword glows. Zheshio turned a blind eye to it and walked over. Those sword intents were still hidden in the darkness, unactivated as they slashed at his body. The disciples of South Stream Temple were well aware of the relationship between him and Chen Chongsheng. The Holy Maiden had been invited into the Imperial Palace, so they were truly incapable of making a decision in such a short amount of time. There was no such thing as a truly flawless plan in the world. Even though Su Yorong was extremely skilled in divination and her fated star plate had contracted the starry sky, there were still some things that she could not calculate, like the human heart. Just like this, Zhishyo walked past the sword array of South Stream Temple and entered the house. And then, he saw Tang 36. Tang 36 was very worried about Chen Chongqing, so it was only natural that he would appear here. It was obvious that all the arrangements Su Yorong had left behind were of no use against him. "What is he doing?" Zhishyo asked Tang 36. Only half a day had passed, but Tang 36 was already very tired. The fact that Chen Chongqing was about to die had placed an enormous psychological pressure on everyone. As Chen Chongqing's best friend, Zhishyo's mood had been greatly affected. Tang 36 did not reply. He gazed at the tightly shut door, his expression somewhat gloomy. Zhishyo said no more. He walked up and pushed open the door. There was no one in the room. Seeing the empty bed and the unoccupied desk, his and Tang 36's complexions instantly changed. After a while, Su Moyu, who had received the message, also arrived. "What do we do?" Su Moyu had a very worried expression. "We have to quickly report this to the Li Palace." After a moment of silence, Zhishyo replied, "Don't. There is a type of colossal beast that, when it knows that it is about to die, will walk to a very distant place and calmly wait for its final moment to arrive. It is not willing to be seen by anyone, perhaps because it feels that only by doing this can it preserve its final dignity." Tang 36 said, "Chen Chongqing probably thinks this way." Zhishyo said, "Before a cat dies, it will also do this." The bedding on the bed was neatly folded, like a piece of tofu. The desk and bookshelves were spotless, as if they had just been bought today. When Chen Chongqing had left, it seemed like he had not brought anything with him, including those old books on the bookshelves and that rotten bamboo dragonfly. It was just that Xianyuan Po was not present at this time, or else he might have discovered that the Orthodox Academy's kitchen was missing a cleaver for chopping bones. In addition, when Yi Xiaoyan entered the library to rest, she discovered that a small box had appeared by her bedding. Opening the box, she saw a letter, signed by Chen Chongqing. He said that it was for Su Yorong. An hour before these events, in the middle of the night, Chen Chongqing had jumped out of the window of the library. Passing through the dense forest, he arrived at the kitchen on the other side of the lake. Taking out a cleaver, he opened the yellow paper umbrella, climbed over the newly built wall, and left the Orthodox Academy. The female disciples of South Stream Temple discovered that the target they had been protecting had disappeared. Not too long after, this news reached the manor on the outskirts of the city and the courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department. The crabapple tree in early autumn had naturally not bloomed, nor had it had time to shed its leaves. Its verdant leaves were like a carpet, gently brushing by the night wind. Starlight fell on the crimson official's gown and then reflected off the crabapple tree. The green leaves that rose and fell were plated with a scarlet luster, as if they had become a sea of blood. I do not like any variable that escapes my control. I hope that you can eliminate this variable as soon as possible. In other words, you only have one night to find him. Zhou Tong stood on the steps, gazing at the dense mass of kneeling officials in the courtyard. He expressionlessly said, "And then, I don't care what method you use, you must kill him." The officials in the courtyard silently dispersed like a tide, leaving behind only the solitary crabapple tree and two officials dressed in crimson officials' gowns. There were very few officials that had the right to stand side by side with Zhou Tong, but Qing Jun was one of them. As a powerful minister similarly deeply trusted by the Divine Empress, he was only ranked below Zhou Tong in the 8 tigers of the common people. Intruding into the Orthodox Academy at night to assassinate him is one thing, but he has left the Orthodox Academy. If we still want to kill him in the capital, this is an open murder. The Pope will not let us go. Qing Jun was an official of the Grand Court of Revision, but he did not have the slightest of the solemnity bestowed upon him by the laws of the Zhou dynasty. His triangular eyebrows hung down, his nose sunken, and his lips thin. Just from his appearance, one would find him extremely repulsive. The officials that the Divine Empress had used at the very beginning were all rejected by the bureaucracy, once frustrated people. This was because at the very beginning, there was not a single official that truly possessed both ability and integrity that was willing to pledge loyalty to her. Besides the Empress, who in the world was willing to let go of people like us? A faint smile hung on Zhou Tong's face. Under the illumination of the starlight, his face seemed somewhat pale, as if he was not a living person. His smile also seemed strange and terrifying. The news that Chen Chongqing had left the Orthodox Academy was sent to that manner. The Tianhai clan's meeting was hastily concluded and the people quickly dispersed. The will of the clan was subsequently spread throughout the capital. From the imperial guard to the capital government, countless people entered the darkness in an attempt to find Chen Chongqing and then kill him. Tianhai Chenwu walked under the autumn tree and gazed at that bright ball of light in the distance. He remained silent for a very long time. That was the dew platform, the Empress's favorite place to stay. Gazing at his father's back, Tianhai Xingshu also remained silent. He felt that something was wrong today. Killing Chen Chongqing was naturally not an easy task, but it was not right to have the entire Tianhai clan erupt into such a frenzy. This was because this was too great of a force, because this was not necessarily enough to find Chen Chongqing. On the contrary, it was easier to alert the people on the other side, even somewhat like a notification. Why? Chapter 6:14. If we can kill him, that would naturally be for the best, but if we can't, then what? And don't forget that there has still been no sound from the palace. Perhaps the Empress is also hesitating. Tianhai Chenwu gazed in the direction of the distant dew platform, exhaustion and disappointment appearing on his face. For the sake of the imperial throne, he had planned and prepared for 10-some years, but now it seemed that the road ahead was still shrouded in darkness. Perhaps it was very painful, but he had to begin considering other paths. Is father not worried about the future? Tianhai Xingshu asked. In the last few years, the Tianhai clan had enjoyed limitless glory. Including the Chen imperial clan, the Tang clan, the Qiushan clan, the Zhu clan, and the Luofeng clan, these 1,000-year-old clans with deep reserves, had all been firmly suppressed. If one were to say that these clans and those officials who were loyal to the imperial clan had no objections to the Tianhai clan, no one would believe it. If the Tianhai clan could not ascend to the imperial throne of the Great Zhou, when the time came, when the wall was down, everyone would give it a push. Who would show mercy? He is Ant's son, and the blood of my Tianhai clan flows in his body. Even if he ascends to the throne in the future, does that mean that his mother's clan must be exterminated? No, whether it's Shang Xingzhou or the Pope behind him, he will feel apprehensive and uneasy. In the end, he will still have to rely on our strength. Tianhai Chenwu gazed at the distant dew platform, his short beard lightly fluttering in the wind, giving off an extremely capable and unyielding feeling. We are not Zhou Tong, who will be shouted at and beaten by everyone the moment he loses his family, so we need to be more dependable. Tianhai Xingshu understood his father's meaning, but if the rumors were true, if Chen Chongqing really was Crown Prince Xiaoming, then he would pose a threat to the Divine Empress. At a time like this, they had to consider the future ahead of time? He suddenly felt that the wind in the garden had grown cold, and then he remembered that it was already a bleak autumn. The Tianhai clan's current status was naturally inextricably linked to the Divine Empress, but just as the Tang Old Master often said while fishing on the banks of the Wenshui, the Tianhai clan and the Tianhai Divine Empress had never been one and the same. The Tianhai clan grasped many hidden forces in society. Even if they lost the Divine Empress's care, no faction could uproot the clan in a single night. A truly far-sighted and wise person would never place the future of a clan on a single person, even if that person was the most powerful person in the world. The Zhou clan of Tianliang County had prospered because of Zhou Luo, but now it was about to wither because of the fall of this expert. This was a lesson, a warning to all the other clans. Moreover, no matter how great a person was, there would always come a day when they would return to the Sea of Stars. Emperor Taizong was dead, Zhou Dufu was dead. Who could escape the two words of life and death? Countless people poured into the night from the Tian Hai family's manor and the yamen controlled by the Tian Hai family, beginning to search for Chen Chongqing's whereabouts. This naturally alarmed many people, and those people immediately noticed the suspicious movements of the gloomy yamen in the alley of the Northern Military Department. Only then did they find out from the Orthodox Academy the source of all the commotion. Chen Chongqing had left the Orthodox Academy, going somewhere unknown. A warning bell rang throughout the Li Palace, and the priests scattered into the night. The lights of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education were simultaneously lit, illuminating the plum blossoms in the corridor with a bewitching beauty. 200-some cavalry galloped out from the maple forest, their hooves thundering as they galloped towards the Orthodox Academy. On the night of early autumn, the situation in the capital was abruptly tense and somber to the extreme. Yellow leaves drifted down from the sky. How to die? This was the question. Ordinary people were not very willing to ponder this question, and every time they thought about it, they would subconsciously avoid it. Chen Chongqing's life was not ordinary, so he had pondered this question, and had pondered it many times. He had his own very clear answer, his own attitude. To live a lively life, to die a lonely death. This was the answer that Zheshio and Tang 36 had guessed, but it was not his answer. He might choose to live alone when he left this world, but in the period before that, he would not live alone, lowering his head to lick his wounds in silence. He did not leave to find his own grave, but to do a few things. Zheshio's words had reminded him that this world truly was brimming with malice towards him, but the people living in this world had already shown him a great deal of kindness. Before he left this world, he wanted to return that kindness, to respond to that malice. This was something that he had to accomplish. On this quiet and beautiful autumn night, the streets and alleys of the capital were filled with the eyes of the various powers. The cavalry of the imperial court and the orthodoxy galloped through the streets at high speeds. Countless people were searching for him and then attempting to kill him or protect him. However, at this moment, he had already avoided everyone's line of sight. Raising the yellow paper umbrella, he noiselessly arrived at New North Bridge and then jumped into that dry well. The space at the bottom of the well was still pitch black and brimming with cold. His injuries had not completely recovered, so he fell deeper and deeper into the ground. His speed grew faster and faster, as if he wanted to become a stone that would perish together with the earth. However, when he was still several dozen zhang from the ground, a thick qi appeared beneath him like a soft cotton cushion, greatly reducing the speed at which he fell. This sort of situation had already occurred many times, so he did not panic. He adjusted his posture and waited for the qi to dissipate before his 2 feet very steadily landed on the snow-covered ground. A speck of light appeared on the ceiling of the cavern. It was a night pearl, and then countless night pearls began to light up one after the other, as if countless stars had descended into this world. A black silhouette the size of a mountain seemed to be moving slowly, but it was actually swiftly drifting over from the distance, looking down at him from above. Under the silver light, the black dragon's eyes, which were even larger than a building, glowed with a cold light. They were brimming with a tyrannical mood, yet they also gave off a feeling of indifference. This sort of meeting had already occurred many times, but this time was different. Neither Chen Chongqing nor the black dragon spoke. In the cold wind, they silently stared at each other, the atmosphere somewhat oppressive. After an unknown amount of time, a dragon's roar brimming with anger reverberated through the underground cavern. The radiance of the night pearls that spilled down from the ceiling began to tremble, and the snow and frost on the ground danced in the air, lashing against Chen Chongqing's body. Like a whip, it left behind many deep and shallow scars. Chen Chongqing could understand what she was feeling at the moment, so he silently endured. The dragon's roar gradually faded, the wind and snow gradually ceased. The black dragon looked down at him, the indifference in its eyes gone, only brutality and anger remained, as well as a hint of perplexity. You're going to die." After the dragon's roar faded, it was replaced by the voice of a young human girl. It could be heard that she was currently very flustered. Chen Chongqing looked at the black dragon, feeling that for such a massive body and such a frightening level of cultivation, for its voice to be so clear and tender, the contrast was rather strong. Yes. The black dragon was once again enraged, its tail, which was over 10 li away, struck towards the wall, but before it could land, it was sent flying by the formation on the wall, causing innumerable amounts of snow and frost to scatter. But, the black dragon looked at Chen Chongqing, a hint of pain appearing in its eyes. Perhaps it was due to the backlash from the formation, or perhaps it was because it had seen the sorrowful scene of his future, but its voice trembled slightly. "You still haven't learned the dragon language. I'm sorry." Chen Chongqing lowered his head, and after a while, he raised it up, looked at her and said, "In this lifetime, I might not be able to learn the dragon language." Then you're not allowed to die." Chen Chongqing said nothing. The black dragon sorrowfully said, "You haven't even done what you promised me, how can you die?" "I'm sorry." Chen Chongqing apologized once more, saying, "I once promised you that I would find a way to rescue you from this place." Yes. The black dragon's eyes suddenly brightened, and she hurriedly said, "You still haven't rescued me, how can you die? I won't allow you to die like this." "Don't worry, I've already thought of a way to rescue you." Chen Chongqing looked at her and smiled, very happy and very sincere. "On the journey back from Mount Han, I had a lot of time to think, calculate for a very long time, and confirm that we still have to start with the scroll of time. In a little while, I will go to the stone wall and complete the array, ensuring that the power of the scroll of time can be maintained for a very long time. However, if we only rely on the array, we might need a very long time to use the power of time to remove the seal, so I recommend that you begin cultivating the scroll of time on your own. Perhaps it can speed up time." He suddenly thought of something and said, "That's right, I met Wang Jitsa in Mount Han, but I was in too much of a hurry at the time, so I forgot to ask him about these things." Upon hearing that person's name, the black dragon, who was still immersed in the anger and sorrow of Chen Chongqing's impending death, couldn't help but stare blankly. She asked in surprise, "That swindler is still alive?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Although he did not admit his identity, it should not be wrong." The black dragon's voice turned cold, brimming with hatred. "It truly is the case that the wicked live for 10,000 years. Chen Chongqing didn't know what to say. From the perspective of the black dragon, she was just an ignorant little girl of the dragon race. Although she had committed many sins after coming ashore from the southern sea, being imprisoned for several hundred years was enough to atone for her sins. Why was she imprisoned forever in this underground world that never saw the light of day? But from Wang Jitsa's perspective, as the military advisor and half-guardian of the great Zhou dynasty, he naturally had the responsibility to protect the common people of the great Zhou. Chen Chongqing. The black dragon's voice suddenly became calm. He was somewhat confused. The black dragon's voice resounded, cold and tinged with a faint sorrow. "You shouldn't have been a good person." "Why?" "Because good people don't live long." Chen Chongqing once again lowered his head, gazing at the frost beneath his feet. He thought back to the path of ice and rain that he had traversed in these past few years and fell silent for a very long time. He had always believed that people like Wang Po were good people, and that he definitely couldn't be considered one. He was only doing things that pleased his heart, because cultivation was to follow one's heart. It was a pity that life and death were up to the heavens, but they were not willing to listen to one's own heart. He raised his head to look at the black dragon, wanting to say a few words of explanation, but he suddenly discovered that the black dragon had disappeared. Just like that, the mountain-like body of the dragon disappeared into thin air. Chen Chongqing was abnormally shocked. He looked around, wanting to understand just what had happened. Then, he saw that a girl had appeared in the snow. The girl was dressed in black and sat in the snow. Her skirt was spread out and two thin chains extended from the back of her skirt, extending towards the stone wall 10 odd li away. Chapter 6:15. The little girl's face was as beautiful as a painting. She was like a newly born black lotus, but her eyes were very indifferent. Deep inside there was a sense of cruelty. Added with her black vertical pupils, she looked very strange. Chen Chongqing couldn't say anything for a long time. He had already guessed who this little girl in black was, especially after seeing the cinnabar-like bloodline between her eyebrows. He knew that based on the lifespan of the dragon race, she was a little girl. He once heard Su Yurong say that she was a little girl, but he still didn't think that she was actually a little girl. After an unknown amount of time, Chen Chongqing finally awoke from this shock. He walked towards her. His movement was a little slow because he was a little nervous. The little girl raised her head and glanced at him. She seemed a little impatient and cold. Chen Chongqing looked at the indifference and cruelty in her eyes. He felt a little uncomfortable because he was looking down on him. But he knew that this was not her nature. It wasn't that she looked down on him. It was the instinct of a higher-level being to look down on a lower-level being. Just like how humans looked at cows and horses on the grassland. Maybe there was love, sympathy, or respect, but it was the feeling of looking down on him. This was something that couldn't be changed. Chen Chongqing walked in front of her. She lowered her head slightly. It seemed like she didn't want him to see her face clearly. Or maybe she was pretending to be indifferent to hide her nervousness. But she didn't know that for human males, lowering their head would easily make them think that she was gentle and shy. I didn't know you could be like this. Chen Chongqing didn't know what to say. He knew why she was willing to meet him in human form. Because he was about to die. She wanted to express something. He didn't know what she wanted to express, but he had a vague guess. So he couldn't help but be nervous. I won't let you die. The little girl raised her head and said to Chen Chongqing. At this time, she had already recovered her calmness and indifference. She was sitting on the ground and was much shorter than Chen Chongqing. But when she looked up, it seemed like she was looking down on him. Her tone was like an order or an order. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, how could I be willing to die? Then he remembered that Yurong seemed to have said something similar to him during the day before she went to the imperial palace. Just now I said that the scroll of time should be able to help you break the seal and leave. Since last year, Yurong and I have been discussing how to save you. On this journey she also gave us many ideas. The array I laid down was actually a sketch she drew. For some reason, Chen Chongqing looked at her and said these words very seriously. Perhaps it was because he vaguely guessed that he didn't want her to have any opinions about Yurong in the future. The little girl turned her head away and refused to say a word. She did not expect Su Yurong to help her. She was a little surprised, but that was all. Chen Chongqing said, I thought you would at least thank her. She's with you every day, but you're about to die. Do you think I'll thank her? The little girl's voice suddenly became sharp, and she seemed very angry. Chen Chongqing didn't know what to say. Logically speaking, they were already very familiar with each other after meeting so many times. However, this was his first time meeting the little girl, so he couldn't help but feel a little strange and awkward. This, Lady Gigi. I said not to call me Gigi. The little girl glared at him and said, I have a name. Chen Chongqing recalled that Su Yurong had once told him that the little black dragon seemed to have had a name. It seemed to be Zhu Sha, but before he could say it, I'm called Hong Zhuang, the little girl expressionlessly said to him. Chen Chongqing naturally wouldn't argue with her over such a trivial matter. He said, I'm going to lay down the array. Do you want to come with me to take a look? From last autumn to this summer, he had come here many times to study the array on the stone wall, pondering how to break the array and help the little black dragon escape. He had never once allowed her to watch. It wasn't that his method of breaking the array was some secret, but that she wasn't interested, or that she didn't believe that Chen Chongqing had the ability to break the seal Wang Jitsa had laid down. But today, he wanted to invite her to come with him to take a look, because there might not be a chance in the future. The little black dragon thought it over, then stood up. Turning around, she walked to the distant stone wall. Because it was rather inconvenient for her to move, she very naturally lifted her black dress, revealing her bare feet. Her bare feet were as white as snow, and when they stepped on the frost on the ground, the frost instantly paled in comparison. 2 thin chains were tied to her ankles. The chains were pitch black and rusted, contrasting with her snow-white ankles, making them even more distinct. Several centuries had passed, and she had tried to escape countless times underground. The chains had already sunk deep into her ankles, the wounds clearly visible, and even her white bones could be faintly seen. Just looking at this sight made her feel pain, let alone herself. Chen Chongqing walked up and took the chains in his hands, carefully ensuring that they wouldn't rub against her ankles. Although her abilities were shackled by the array, she still retained many of the dragon race's natural abilities, allowing her to freely move through the underground space. Chen Chongqing's speed was also very astonishing. Logically speaking, they should have been able to quickly travel 10-some li, but for some reason, they were moving very slowly. The night pearls in the ceiling, like a sky full of stars, were extinguished one by one. She lifted the hem of her dress and he lifted the chains, vanishing into the darkness. The gloomy rays of light fell on the stone wall, casting the faces of the 2 legendary divine generals into uncertainty. The chains in their hands seemed to be coated in the venom of the shaman race, chilling to the heart. Chen Chongqing stood in front of the stone wall, looking at the portrait and the array hidden in the stone wall. After a few moments of thought, he took out the things he had already prepared from his sheath and began to lay down the array. Time slowly passed. He was especially focused, his brow creasing from time to time, though he didn't know whether it was because he had encountered some obstacle or because of the pain from his internal injuries. The little black dragon habitually sat on the snow-covered ground, raising her small face to look at the portrait on the stone wall. She seemed to be in a daze, thinking about something. Regret and frustration could be faintly seen in her indifferent eyes, but only when she looked at Chen Chongqing would those negative emotions gradually fade. After some time, Chen Chongqing finally finished laying down the array. He carefully examined it twice and confirmed that there were no problems, only then did he truly breathe a sigh of relief. More than 2 years ago, when he had come to this place from the underground of the imperial palace, he had spent a very long time studying these 2 chains that imprisoned the black dragon. He had used all the knowledge of the Taoist techniques he had learned in his life, and he had received much help from Su Yu Rong in the last half-year. He was confident that it would definitely be effective. He took out the scroll of time and gave it to the black dragon, then looked at her with a serious expression and asked, "Do you have any method to temporarily put yourself into a coma?" The little black dragon stared at him with wide eyes, thinking, what sort of request is this? Chen Chongqing was originally prepared to say something, but seeing her expression, he knew that she would not agree. He could only say, "No matter what happens in a little while, it's best if you can endure it." The little black dragon suddenly felt that something was wrong and prepared to strike him down, but she was too late. Noiselessly, like the leaves of a willow tree cutting through the breeze of early spring, the peerlessly sharp stainless sword was unsheathed and then slashed down. A small cut was made on Chen Chongqing's wrist, blood gushing out. There was clearly something wrong with his blood. It was suffused with a faint golden color and seemed to contain boundless energy. It was incomparably pure and holy, yet it also gave off an extremely bewitching feeling. His blood of the sacred light also contained Su Yu Rong's true blood of the heavenly phoenix. As he cut open his wrist, the blood came into contact with the frigid winds of the underground space. An indescribable fragrance began to spread out with incomprehensible speed. This fragrance was very much like the smell of grass, but it was even more like the smell of dew on the grass, like the smell of freshly born fruits, and even more like the smell of freshly ripened fruits that had been blown by the night wind for an entire night. If this situation were allowed to continue, this smell would travel along New North Bridge and into the capital. Perhaps all the people of the capital would go crazy, and even the birds of the mausoleum of books would madly fly over. Fortunately, or perhaps because Chen Chongqing had long since prepared for this, the array he had just laid down contained the array intent that Su Yu Rong had used the Tong Bao to isolate the smell of blood for him in Mount Han. Using the sacred light in his blood as a foundation, it could effectively eliminate the smell of blood. Coupled with the extreme coldness naturally exuded by the black dragon, it could ensure that before this smell naturally faded, it would not drift out of New North Bridge. But there was a problem. The little black dragon was at his side, within the range of the array. She had been watching him do this the entire time, so she had naturally smelled this smell. A crisp clang resounded. The chains were stretched taut and her body floated into the air, her black hair madly dancing behind her, and her black dress similarly dancing. Her beautiful face was ruthless and merciless, like that of a god or demon. Her bewitching vertical pupils surged with countless emotions, extremely complex and conflicted. It was the natural intimacy of a supreme life form to another supreme divine energy, but also the boundless desire of an expert towards true eternal life, and even more so the instinctive desire of all living things. She looked down at Chen Chongqing, greedy yet uneasy, yearning yet sorrowful. She constantly struggled, until finally she gradually calmed down. Calmness did not mean safety. Although she was a noble and powerful black frost dragon, she was still young. Moreover, she had left the Southern Sea as a child and had not received the complete education of the dragon race, so she had not learned how to control her desires, how to prevent her mind and will from being controlled by these desires. Her expression was very calm, but her eyes were brutal. She had decided to eat Chen Chongqing because he was too delicious. Moreover, she had enough reason to eat Chen Chongqing. Even if the will of the heavenly Tao descended from the starry sky to question her, she would feel no shame. You heartless thing! I gave you my first blood, but you're still fooling around with other women. In order to fulfill the oath I made back then, I'll eat you alive. After saying this, her chi soared with terrifying speed, instantly breaking through several realms and arriving at the divine domain. She then lunged at Chen Chongqing. On the last day of the 8th month, without saying anything else, I just want to say, thank you everyone. I like everyone very much. Don't think that I haven't said anything recently, but I've actually been watching this entire time. Chapter 6:16. Fresh blood dripped from Chen Chongqing's wrist onto the iron chain, emitting a chi-chi sound. The blood began to flow along the carved lines, corroding towards the depths of the iron chain. The blood that remained on the surface of the iron chain melted upon contact with the wind, igniting into a faint blue flame, spraying endless light and heat in all directions. This was the formidable might of the phoenix blood. The lines carved into the chains and the stone wall began to exude bright rays of light. The array slowly activated and an indescribable chi, like the leaves of spring and fruits of autumn, appeared. This chi seemed to contain a fragment of the divine power of time. At this moment, the little black dragon came to the surface, her black hair madly dancing and her beautiful face brimming with a fiendish aura. Her black clothes were also madly dancing, and one could faintly see shards of ice sprinkling down like diamonds. This meant that she had already raised her chi to its peak. At this moment, she was already standing in the divine domain. Let alone Chen Chongqing, Not even a powerful divine general like Xue Xingchuan would necessarily be a match for her in a duel. At this moment, Chen Chongqing's mind and attention were completely focused on the thin chains. He seemed to have forgotten everything else around him, as if he had also forgotten the fatal allure of his blood, but when the little black dragon spoke of first blood, oaths and women, his left hand had trembled. This meant that he had actually been clear-headed this entire time. How could he forget the curse of fate the heavenly Tao had placed on him? How could he forget Senior Yu Ren's exhortations in that night temple? He had naturally already prepared a plan to deal with the possibly deranged little black dragon. Two extremely heavy sounds came from the stone wall, like someone was beating a war drum from deep within the stone wall, or like two peals of thunder from the extremely distant night sky. In the scene on the stone wall, the hands of the two legends gripping the chains suddenly exploded with intense white light, ultimately transforming into two almost condensed balls of white light about the size of eggs. These two balls of white light rapidly traveled along the chains, instantly arriving at the pair of snow-white ankles. No one could be faster than these two balls of white light. Even the fastest Su Yorong and Nank would find it impossible to avoid them. The infinitely strengthened black dragon, who had once more stepped into the divine domain, could spend the day in the southern sea and the night in the western continent, but she could not be faster. These two balls of white light moved as fast as lightning, because they had always been lightning. Crack, crack. Two extremely clear sounds exploded in the quiet underground space. The little black dragon stopped in the air behind Chen Chongqing. Her wildly dancing black hair and black clothes were filled with incandescent lightning, and the fiendish intent on her beautiful face had vanished without a trace. The two thin chains on her ankles trembled at a high speed, making clanking sounds, like willows in a gale that could snap at any time. With a cry of anger and pain, she fell heavily to the ground. She wanted to stand up, but she was unable to do so. Her petite body that was covered by the black clothes was still trembling slightly. It looked very strange, but also had an indescribable charm. After an unknown period of time, the power of thunder that had entered her body through the chains finally dissipated, and the lightning and snow disappeared at the same time. She sat up with difficulty. Her small face was abnormally pale, and her vertical pupils still had lingering fear. The way she looked at Chen Chongqing was no longer as crazed and greedy as before, but with hatred. Chen Chongqing turned his head to look at her, the corners of his lips perked up in a smile. His face was also very pale, most likely because he had lost too much blood and consumed too much of his soul in order to activate the array to break the seal. He was well aware that doing this would only accelerate the rate at which his injuries would erupt. To put it another way, he would die even earlier than he had calculated, but he had still done this without hesitation, because this was something he had promised her a long time ago. Before his death, he wanted to complete this task. Only then could he easily leave. "What's with your blood? It smells even better than when you were in meditative introspection. Just now I actually couldn't control my thoughts," the little black dragon asked, her heart still fluttering with fear. Chen Chongqing pointed at the two iron chains tied to her ankles. His meaning was very clear. He knew that the formation that Wang Zhisu had left behind back then would create a powerful restriction on certain aspects of her. "Since you knew, why didn't you tell me ahead of time so that I could prepare myself?" The little black dragon hatefully said, "Truly a bad person." At this time, the wound on Chen Chongqing's wrist had already healed. The sacred light barrier that Su Yorong had placed on his body had begun to take effect once more. The blood on the chains had already seeped into the chains or been transformed into energy by the array, so he no longer had to worry about arousing the little black dragon's vicious nature or attracting other experts. Chen Chongqing walked up to her and stuffed several dozen pills that he had asked the priests of the Li Palace to refine into her mouth. Then he lightly caressed her back to help her digest the medicine. The little black dragon slightly squinted her eyes, apparently enjoying being caressed like this. After a while, he came to his senses and recalled what Mo you had once said to Su Yorong. Only then did he realize that she was a little girl and that it truly was rather inappropriate for him to hug her like this, so he quickly let go. The little black dragon opened her eyes wide and glared at him, clearly displeased. Of course, I'm not completely confident. Chen Chongqing paused, then continued to explain her previous question. When I risked meditation and ignited the snowy plains of star radiance in my body, if not for you saving me, I would have died long ago. Since you gave me this life, it's only right that I return it to you. If I'm fated to be eaten by someone, you're probably the only person I can accept. Whether it was because of these words or the word person, the little black dragon became happy, very happy. Then, as she thought of something, her cheeks began to glow red. She lowered her head, unwilling to look at him. She whispered, "Scoundrel." Chen Chongqing froze, not understanding why she was cursing him, why she was angry. After thinking it over, he took out a chest and placed it in front of her, saying, "This is for you." The little black dragon raised her head and looked at the chest, her bright eyes brimming with curiosity. "What is it?" She opened the chest, her beautiful face illuminated by light. The chest was filled with precious gold, silver, and jewels. Some had been bestowed to him by White Emperor City, some had been given to him by the Li Palace, some had been given to him by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, some had been given to him by Tang 36 to play with, some had been from the mausoleum of Zhou, and all sorts of treasures. This was a third of his entire fortune. Of course, this was all that remained after he had divided up his assets with Su Yurong last winter. He had left a third for Luoluo, a third for his senior brother, and a third for the little black dragon. He believed that these were the three people who treated him the best. As she looked at the treasures in the chest, the little black dragon's eyes grew brighter and brighter. "Do you like it?" Chen Chongqing looked at her, somewhat nervous, but also hopeful. She lowered her head and softly grunted in affirmation. There was no dragon that did not like gold and silver, let alone the fact that she had been imprisoned underground for several hundred years. It was only by relying on the gold and silver promised to her by those important figures of the imperial palace that she had been able to survive. And this was something that he had specially left for her. She raised her head and earnestly said to Chen Chongqing, "Did you know? It's already been many years since I left my home in the southern sea and came to the land of you humans, but only after I got to know you did I live a happy life, so I truly am very grateful to you." Chen Chongqing thought of her experiences, thought of his own life, and naturally felt a sense of empathy for her. "My happiest days were when I transformed into a wandering soul and followed you out of the capital, all the way to Honshu City. I saw many sights and ate many delicious food. The scenery in the Garden of Zhou was also not bad. I don't like the Garden of Zhou." "Why?" "Because Royal Father died in there." Chen Chongqing said nothing. The little black dragon sneered at him. "And in the Garden of Zhou, you and that woman were so lovey-dovey that you forgot who I was long ago. What was there for me to be happy about?" Chen Chongqing felt rather helpless. "At the time, I didn't know that she was Su Yurong, and in my heart, you are a senior worthy of respect." The little black dragon ignored him and hatefully said, "In any case, you're just a heartless and fickle fellow." Chen Chongqing thought, where did the word heartless come from? He suddenly thought of the words the little black dragon had said just before she was about to eat him. He thought, if that's really the case, then using this sort of one-sided oath to restrain her actions is truly rather unreasonable, or perhaps childish. He was not very old, but he had always been calm and composed, so he naturally would not childishly argue with her. But seeing that he was silent, she became even more angry. She opened her mouth and blew a breath of air into his face. She was a black frost dragon, so the air she blew was a dragon's breath. Logically speaking, when the dragon breath descended, Chen Chongqing should have been instantly frozen into a block of ice, just like he had been the last few times. She had originally thought this way, prepared to properly tidy him up, but she had forgotten that in the past, she had always used her original form as a black frost dragon to meet with Chen Chongsheng. Now, she had transformed into a human girl. Putting aside her other cultivation levels, she could at least no longer breathe out dragon breath. Her current dragon breath was a single breath. This breath was like an orchid, indescribably fragrant and devoid of any power. Just like that, it blew onto Chen Chongsheng's face. Strangely enough, Chen Chongsheng's body had been perfectly cleansed by her dragon blood, making it impossible for ordinary weapons to wound him. Her breath clearly had no power, but his face still turned red. The little black dragon froze, then somewhat stupidly blew another breath onto his face. Chen Chongsheng's face grew redder and redder, especially his ears. Just like his faded star, they were completely red. The little black dragon blinked her eyes in confusion, but in the next moment, she realized what she was doing. Instantly, countless feelings of embarrassment surged into her mind, her small face instantly becoming incomparably red. She felt that her face was very hot, and even her body was heating up. She had forgotten that she was a black frost dragon. With just a thought, even a volcano could be frozen. Volcanoes could be frozen, ice and snow could be melted. She felt her body grow soft from the heat, somewhat powerless to support herself. Slowly, she leaned against Chen Chongsheng's chest. Her breath was like the wind brushing against the snow lotuses of a glacier, lightly passing by his ear. Chen Chongsheng's body seemed to be frozen, not daring to move at all. Suddenly, he felt a little wet. It was because she had stuck out the tip of her clove-like tongue and licked his earlobe. The taste is truly fragrant. She leaned against his shoulder and softly said, "If you really want to die, then let me eat you, let you die in my stomach." Back in the underground space, when Gigi used her dragon breath to deal with him, I kept thinking about the scene in today's chapter. I swore that I would definitely write it down and not forget it. After I wrote it, I felt that it was so frivolous. I really like it. In addition, this month's book review activity has already begun. Everyone can go to the book review area to participate. The deadline for leaving your comments is tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. The prizes are as generous as ever, but the peripherals have yet to arrive. Students who have won prizes might have to wait for a while. Chapter 6:17. He didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been very long, it could have been very short. Chen Chongsheng awoke from his stupor and dashed away as if he was fleeing. The little black dragon watched his back disappear into the darkness, a hint of fiendish intent appearing on her face. The expression in her vertical pupils became abnormally cold. The seal that Wang Jitsa had left on the stone wall prevented her from recovering her true strength, but if she wanted to, she could still easily grab Chen Chongsheng and eat him. Otherwise, how could she have become the so-called taboo that no one in the imperial palace dared to mention? But she did not do this. The anger in her vertical pupils gradually dissipated, leaving behind only loneliness, grievance, and stubbornness. She was keenly aware that Chen Chongsheng wanted to flee not because he was afraid of being eaten by her, but because he wanted to escape from something else. Without the little black dragon's help, Chen Chongsheng would not have been able to use the pond to return to the surface. The path he had chosen was the one he had taken when he first mistakenly entered the underground world. When he pushed open the heavy stone door and returned to the cold palace that he had not seen for a very long time, he gazed at the distant endless palace and couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Back then, when Mou used the two-mind connection and borrowed the array formation in the palace to trap him in the never-ending palace, she probably never thought that he would really have the courage to enter the underground to face the legendary taboo, and thus find a chance of survival. Similarly, he never thought that the taboo was a girl of the dragon race who looked violent and cold on the surface but was actually a little naive and ignorant. Furthermore, he actually had so many connections and stories with this girl. Standing in the autumn trees by the Black Dragon Pool and gazing at the famous Tong Palace array, He fell into deep thought. He was well versed in the Taoist canon and had studied arrays quite a bit. Although he could not compare to Su Yorong or Go Hanshi, he could still be considered a well-known figure amongst the cultivators of the world. Thus, when he was trapped here, he was able to discover that the life gate of this array was deep within the cold pool. In order to remove the seal that Wang Jitsa had laid down, he had prepared for a very long time. Coupled with Su Yorong's help, he believed that in 10 years at most, the two chains would gradually lose their effectiveness and the little black dragon would be able to regain her freedom. If she also cultivated the scroll of time he had left underground, the time could be shortened a little. But at that time, he would probably no longer be here. After 1,000 years, the white clouds drifted leisurely. Things remained the same, but people had changed. But in the end, there were still some people or things he couldn't let go of. South Stream Temple had a divine artifact with the same name as the famous array in this cold palace, Tong Palace. The Tong Palace was in her hands. She should be in the palace at this time, not far from him. Chen Chongqing walked around the edge of the pond and followed a stone path out of the back door of the Tong Palace. He came to a forest and looked at the palace complex in the distance. He didn't want to die alone, but he didn't want her to see him when he left this world. He was prepared to go to the Garden of Zhou in a little while. There was no one there, and no one could enter. Before that, he still had some things to do. A soft rustling sound came from the front of the forest, and several leaves that were turning yellow but still green fell to the ground. The black goat walked out from the forest, looking at Chen Chongqing. It tilted its head slightly, seemingly confused as to why he would appear here today, and not by the pond. Chen Chongqing bowed deeply towards the black goat and gave a serious bow. "Thank you for taking care of me these past 2 years." The black goat turned around, gazing at a certain part of the palace complex. Chen Chongqing understood its meaning and shook his head. "I'm not going there." The black goat turned around and calmly gazed at him, its gloomy eyes like the deepest darkness. "I've lived my entire life earnestly, or perhaps rigidly, because I hoped to live a few more years this way. Now that I've confirmed that I can't live a few more years, if I carefully think about it, my greatest regret is that I've never lived without restraint. I cultivate the Tao of following my heart, but when have I ever truly followed my heart?" Ever since he had confirmed the date of his death, Chen Chongqing had never revealed his true thoughts to anyone, but now he expressed them to the black goat. "So before I die, I've decided to do something that I've always wanted to do. If I succeed, I think I'll be very happy. Kill east and kill west, kill things, so it was just the word kill. Kill all those who oppose you, and then there will naturally be no one who opposes you. Kill the heaven and earth that dare to oppose your will, and then the heaven and earth will naturally submit to your will. But what if the heaven, earth, and man all submit? What happens outside the heaven and earth? What does the human heart matter?" After hearing the Divine Empress's words, Su Yorong was quiet for a very long time. This was the Empress's domineering declaration, and also the Empress's instruction to her, the sole successor. She needed to think for a while, and at the same time, she was silently deducing and calculating. Back when she had told Chen Chongqing that she wanted to enter the imperial palace to plead for leniency from the Empress, Chen Chongqing had said that it was meaningless. Now, seeing the Divine Empress's cold attitude, it seemed to be true. In truth, anyone could have expected this result. But she had still come to the imperial palace. In order to do her best and leave the will of the heavens? Only hoping that she could plead for 10 some days of peace and quiet for Chen Chongqing? No, she was a person of the Taoist sect, but she had her own edge and did not cultivate inaction. From the moment she had left Mount Han until last night, she had always been calculating and calculating, her slender fingers never leaving the fated star plate. She had attempted to see the heavenly Tao, had attempted to pull apart the fog of fate, had attempted to see the true path ahead, but the result of her countless calculations had always been the same. In order for Chen Chongqing to escape from the trap of fate, there was only one nearly illusory thread of fate, and the other end of it was connected to the Empress. Logically speaking, the punishment of the heavenly Tao that Chen Chongqing had received was the effect of the oath the Empress had made when she sacrificed herself to the starry sky. The one who wanted him dead the most was also the Empress, so if she wanted to undo that thread of fate, she naturally had to rely on the Empress. But she knew that the meaning faintly revealed by fate was not like this. To see a mountain as a mountain, not a mountain, and still a mountain in the end, a mountain was still a mountain, but its meaning was different. Thus, she had left the Orthodox Academy and come to the Imperial Palace. She firmly believed that this journey would bring about some change, yet a very long time had passed since daytime, yet no change had occurred. The porcelain cup continued to turn on her fingertip. From day to night, it seemed as if it had never stopped, just like the water wheel on a stream, just like time itself. The art of deduction, in the end, is to exhaust all changes, but the heavenly Tao is indescribable and uncountable, so how can it be calculated? The Divine Empress suddenly placed the porcelain cup on the table and gave her a glance. This glance seemed to have seen through everything. Su Yurong was silent for a while and replied, "Although I can't truly touch it, I can always get closer." The Divine Empress said, "Right now, you don't even understand the human heart. How can you talk about getting closer to the heavenly Tao?" Su Yurong's face became somewhat pale, because she faintly felt that the change she had been waiting for had already occurred, yet that change was not what she wanted. "You laid down the sword array in the Orthodox Academy, then asked the Li Palace to send people to help, then you came to the Imperial Palace to see me. You thought that by doing this you could isolate him from the world and isolate me from his world. Then, you waited for the heavenly Tao to naturally operate and tried to find a trace of change, yet no matter how you calculated, you missed one thing." The Divine Empress looked at her calmly and said, "You forgot that he was also calculating." Su Yurong knew that she was wrong. What if Chen Chongqing left the Orthodox Academy himself? Without her present, no one could stop his departure. The Empress summoned her to the Imperial Palace to create this kind of opportunity for Chen Chongqing. In other words, when she was trying to choose a possible path for Chen Chongqing, the Empress already knew what choice Chen Chongqing would make. "Empress, is it because you are mother and son that you understand him so well?" Su Yurong looked at her and her voice became somewhat cold. The Divine Empress said, "Even now, you still haven't forgotten to mention this matter and try to tug at my heartstrings. You are quite persistent, child." A stubborn expression appeared on Su Yurong's beautiful face and she said, "But isn't what I said the truth?" "Of course it isn't the truth." The Divine Empress's voice was as steady as gold and jade. "I understand him because I have understood him before." She stood up and once again walked to the window and looked out of the Imperial Palace. The evening clouds had already become a sky full of stars. Her voice was also more indifferent than it was during the day, and even seemed a bit cold. In the eyes of ordinary people, the so-called saints know everything, but they don't know that after crossing that threshold, they are still in the mortal world. The reason why saints don't make mistakes is because saints can't make mistakes. Once they make a mistake, they will be covered by the mortal world and will never be able to escape. These words, accompanied by her cold voice, fell into Su Yurong's ears and heart. "I have never feared things like the heavenly Tao or fate. They treat you and me like oxen and horses, so I treat them like oxen and horses. I take the reins, hang the heavy plow, use them to open up new territory, use them to bring favorable weather. But now that I think about it, I have the intention to use the heavenly Tao and fate, which is to admit that it is useful, admit that it has a strength that surpasses my own abilities. And this was the greatest mistake I made back then. Once I made such a judgment, there was a dust in my soul that could never be washed away." The Divine Empress turned around and said to Su Yurong, perhaps because she was speaking of the heavenly Tao, Her expression was very solemn and her perfect face seemed to be imbued with a divine aura. Su Yurong was keenly aware that this was also a teaching, and it was probably a true meaning that no one besides herself had ever heard. From childhood until now, this sort of scene had occurred many times and she had long since gotten used to it, but this time was different. Because the Empress spoke of the most profound, supreme, and wondrous heavenly Tao, spoke of content that was extremely disrespectful to the heavenly Tao. And she faintly understood why the Empress was saying these things to her. In the future, there will be a day when you will become as powerful as me. I hope that you can become even more powerful, so I will not permit you to make the same mistake as me. The Divine Empress looked into her eyes and said, "If the heavenly Tao is before, it should be slain. If the threads of emotion are before, it should be slain even more." When Su Yurong heard these last words, which proved her conjecture, her body shivered. "You are my successor." The Divine Empress walked up to her and looked down at her from above. She calmly said, "I will slay anyone or anything that will obstruct your great Tao." Su Yurong's complexion became even paler and her usually incomparably bright eyes were tinged with sadness. "I like Qiu Shan very much, but you do not accept him, which I like very much. You like Chen Chongqing. Although he has many points worth liking, I still don't like him. You shouldn't waste your life on such pointless things. So the more you care about Chen Chongqing, the more I want to kill him." Su Yurong was quiet for a very long time. Her face grew whiter and whiter until finally it was like snow, no other color visible. Her eyes, however, gradually regained their brightness, like a mountain forest that had passed through the mist and once more welcomed the morning light. Then, it was like a winter sweet had sprouted from the snowy plains, a smear of red. Gradually, the winter sweet blossomed and her face grew redder and redder. With a hum, a gale howled through the hall and two pure white wings Tenna Zhang unfurled from her back. She flew into the air, emitting blazing rays of light and a divine and powerful qi. She ignited the true blood of the heavenly phoenix in her body, raising her cultivation to its peak state, even surpassing the upper limits of what her body could endure. She was the holy maiden of the orthodoxy, representing purity and light, wielding the divine strength bestowed upon her by countless stars. She was still only at the peak of ethereal opening, so of course she had not truly entered the divine domain. But in this state she already possessed some of the characteristics and aura of the divine domain. She had the strength to fight against the experts at the top of the proclamation of liberation, and even experts on the level of the storms of the 8 directions would require some time and methods to completely suppress her. She had never thought that she could threaten the Divine Empress. She only wanted to buy some time to break this trap woven by the heavenly Tao or the human heart. Even if she could only release a tiny bit of light, if she could illuminate the great Zhou Imperial Palace, perhaps illuminate the capital and let the Li Palace see. But in the next moment the wind in the hall stopped. Those scattered rays of pure and holy light vanished without a trace. The pair of pure white wings on her back powerlessly drooped down. A hand gripped her throat. It was the Divine Empress's hand. This hand seemed very delicate, but at this moment it seemed incomparably terrifying. The Divine Empress was not very tall or large, but when she extended her arm, she lifted Su Yurong into the air. A pair of black wings over 100 zhang in length unfurled from her back, breaking through the 2 sides of the vast hall and slowly undulating in the darkness. This scene was abnormally monstrous, yet it also possessed a soul-shaking beauty. Chapter 6:18. The night breeze came from the gigantic black wings. It scattered all the holiness and light, blocked all sight and perception. It represented the purest darkness and power. The young phoenix is clearer than the old phoenix. That's in the future. The Divine Queen looked at Su Yurong in her hand and said expressionlessly, "No one could enter this darkness except for the people she allowed, like that red." Mou kneeled outside the palace with her head down. She didn't dare to look inside. Send her back to the Holy Maiden Peak. Let her go after confirming Chen Chongqing's death. Hearing the Divine Queen's voice, Mou finally dared to raise her head. She wanted to say something, but she didn't. The green bamboo carriage was ready. The black goat came back from somewhere. The Divine Queen looked at the black goat. After a moment of silence, she nodded. The carriage wheels rolled over the green stone and slowly moved towards the darkness outside the royal palace. Mou sat on the seat and looked at the sleeping Su Yurong. She suddenly felt sad. She felt sad for Su Yurong and sad for Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing was dead for sure. Actually, she also felt sad. She hadn't been to the Tradition Academy for a long time. She hadn't seen Chen Chongqing. She had no reason to go. Even if Chen Chongqing died, she had no reason to feel sad. Thinking of this, she felt even sadder. The bamboo carriage seemed slow, but it was actually extremely fast. Moreover, it had an indescribable strangeness to it. Although there weren't many pedestrians on the street at night, there were many cavalrymen and experts who were searching for Chen Chongqing and wanted to protect him. Yet, none of them noticed this carriage. It didn't take long before the bamboo carriage left the capital through the south gate and went on the official road to the Holy Maiden Peak. Almost at the same time they left the capital, Su Yurong opened her eyes. It wasn't because she had hidden something, but because it was the Divine Queen's will. She opened her eyes, but she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even move a finger. Because in her waterfall-like black hair, there was a hairpin that seemed to be casually stuck in a slanted angle. Or it could be said that it was a wooden hairpin. Ranked third on the tier of legendary weapons, wooden sword Little Phoenix. Su Yurong couldn't move, but she could talk. However, she clearly wasn't in the mood to talk at this time. She just quietly looked at the roof of the carriage. No one knew where her gaze would land in the starry sky. Everyone has their own fate. If his fate isn't good, what can we do about it? Mou looked at her and said with pity. Su Yurong withdrew her gaze and said to her, I don't think he will die. Mou naturally knew of Chen Chongqing's current condition. She thought to herself, even if the Pope can protect him from being killed by the Empress, how many more days can he live? Su Yurong seemed to have figured out a very important matter. She calmly said, in the end, that is his own fate, so it should operate according to his thoughts. I wanted to separate him from this world, but he insisted on going back. The heavenly Tao wants him to die, so he prefers to live where death is. Living toward death? Do you still remember Divine General Han Qin? I remember. His Majesty Taizong once said that those who face death to live will find it very difficult to die. Chen Chongqing didn't consider the issue of life and death. He had already disregarded life and death. He left the palace and came to a very secret place, or rather, a very ordinary place, the plum garden in outside the mausoleum of books. He had lived here for quite a period of time, and it was here that he truly became acquainted with Tang 36. This inn was very meaningful to him. It was the beginning of his life in the capital. Now that he had returned to this place, he first considered that no one would expect him to come here, and secondly, he wanted the last part of his life in the capital to begin here. He did not know that not long after he left the imperial palace, a small bamboo carriage drove out of the imperial palace. Su Yurong was in that carriage. He also did not know that his senior brother Yu Ren was currently reading under the starlight in the mausoleum of books across the river. On this night, the two most important people in his life were once very close to him. However, he didn't know at that time. His mind and spirit were all on his own body, the medicinal pills and magic tools that he carried with him, the various cultivation methods in his sea of consciousness, and the countless swords in his scabbard. He sat under a tree in the small courtyard, beginning to sort out his cultivation situation under the starlight. Because his meridians had been completely shattered, his output of true essence was even weaker than it was 2 years ago, even weaker than a normal meditation realm cultivator. However, the star radiance scattered through his flesh and blood was like the snow on the mountains and rivers. It seemed to be scattered here and there, but in reality, it was an enormous amount. Moreover, although he had encountered a problem in breaking into star condensation in Mount Han, it could not be said to have been a complete failure. On the surface, his cultivation was still at the peak of ethereal opening, but if he did not care about his meridians being shattered once more and endangering his life, he could condense starlight into a domain in a very short amount of time. In other words, if he did not care about his life, he could be an initial-level star condensation expert with an enormous amount of true essence for a short amount of time. He also knew countless sword styles, movement techniques, and Taoist technique. After entering the upper level of ethereal opening, the vast majority of the opponents he encountered were already star condensation experts. The simplified Yesher step that had helped him many times before was no longer of much use. The increase in speed brought about by the footwork was very small compared to his own speed. Similarly, ordinary sword styles like the 100 Flowers sword and the Big Dipper sword might occasionally be of some use in battles of the same level, but in tonight's battle, they were useless and could be removed. He calmed his heart and cleared his mind, removing those miscellaneous and imperfect sword styles and Taoist techniques, leaving only the hardest, sharpest, and most powerful techniques in his sea of consciousness. The Wind and Rain sword of Mount Zhong, the true sword of the orthodoxy, the toppling mountain staff, the sword of hithering light, the three forms of Wenshui, the burning heaven sword, the army-shattering sword, and the three swords that Su Li had taught him. The blazing sword, the intellectual sword, and the stupid sword. These were Chen Chongqing's most powerful techniques at the moment. To a true expert of the path of the sword, a sword style might not be high or low, but there was definitely a difference in size. The sword styles that Chen Chongqing was most skilled in were all large swords, especially the three swords that Su Li had taught him. No matter how flexible they were, their auras were enormous. Large swords, or in other words, great techniques, consumed a great deal of spiritual sense and true essence. Chen Chongqing's spiritual sense was extremely stable and powerful, and he also had a large amount of true essence, but output had always been a problem. As a result, he could not endure prolonged battles. In many of his past battles, he would strive to end them in the shortest amount of time possible. Only in the last battle of the Grand Examination and in the chaotic battle around Xuanyang City would he be forced into a bitter battle, and in reality, he had fought extremely bitterly. Quite a few times, he had almost lost to his opponent's sword. Tonight, he had not yet recovered from his heavy injuries and had to forcefully mobilize his true essence to attack. He could not fall into this sort of situation, so he had to succeed in one strike. He opened his eyes and gazed up at the numerous stars in the night sky, beginning to calculate. That person did not come from a poor background. His birth mother was the concubine of the previous assistant minister of rights, and his childhood did not have any unbearably painful experiences. He did not lack food and clothing, nor was he humiliated by his first mother. Although the imperial examinations could not be said to have gone particularly smoothly, they were also not special. That person's personality was extremely callous and cruel, his strength extremely terrifying, and his spiritual sense exceptionally powerful. It was as if he had gathered the resentment and boundless pain of millions of people. He had experienced it before, and it truly was not something that an ordinary person could resist. Countless materials and information appeared in his sea of consciousness. They were like the stars in the night sky, too numerous to be counted. They seemed to be put together in a disorderly manner, and it was impossible to analyze anything useful from them. However, there was a connection between the stars. Countless invisible lines formed a star map, and there was naturally a hidden meaning in it. After some time, he stood up and walked out of the Plum Garden Inn. The stainless sword still quietly rested in the vault sheath, but he had already unsheathed it. The bamboo carriage followed the official road south. The black goat in front of the carriage was probably unaware of the turbulence in the capital. It was just that it had stayed in the imperial palace for too long and wanted to go out for a stroll. It did not find the autumn trees on the side of the road fresh, but it was rather interested in the dewdrops that had just formed on the grass. Walking and stopping like this did not seem fast, but in the time it took to make a cup of tea, the carriage had already passed Mount Shao. Based on the time, it should be able to reach Holy Maiden Peak by noon. The Tianhai Divine Empress's gaze followed Mount Shao eastward, arriving at the plain at the end of the mountain. In the center of the plain was a large city, its walls extremely thick and lofty. Just from looking at it, it was even more majestic and magnificent than the capital. It was the famous capital of the world, Luoyang. In the Eternal Joy Square, the best location in Luoyang, there was a princely estate that occupied an extremely exaggerated area and was unimaginably extravagant. The Prince of Xiang, the Prince of Tai, quite a few of her nominal sons and a few of her grandsons were currently embracing singers and indulging in their desires. She did not know if they were doing this for her or her subordinates to see, but she did not care. She drew back her gaze to the capital. She saw the old man watering the plants in the Li Palace, saw her relatives in the estate, saw the candles in the little orange garden that had not yet burned out, saw the snow under New North Bridge, saw the crabapple tree in the alley of the Northern Military Department, and saw the young man holding an umbrella as he walked in that direction. She stood on the dew platform, the entire world beneath her feet. In her eyes, she did not see that person. 10 some years ago, she believed that person to be dead, but she did not expect that person to survive. From the day this fact was confirmed, a crack appeared between her and the Pope. Other than the two of them, the entire world was completely unaware of it. The storm in the capital was as docile as it had been in the past 10 some years, but it was still not the same as it was in the past. She was keenly aware that the reason that person had Chen Chongqing come to the capital was to intentionally leak the news, to make her and the Pope wary of each other. However, she could only accept it, because time could not be reversed. After all, the incident in the Orthodox Academy had occurred, and the Pope could not possibly believe that she had no objections to it. From the first time they met in the 100 Herb Garden, she had disliked that person, even loathed him, and did not think much of him. Only when she knew that he was not only Shang Xingzhou, but also Daoist Ji did she begin to view him seriously. There were some things that she could not understand at the time, but she finally had an answer. The name Shang Xingzhou represented the orthodoxy of the orthodoxy and those old friends who opposed her. The name Daoist Ji represented Emperor Taizong's will, or perhaps his dying will. This was the true reason for her wariness.